What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Derek O'Shea Show. Turns out I was completely wrong about Putin in Russia, and we have escalated into war. But this stream, we will be watching Biden talk. We will be watching the press conferences and news around the world of what's going on. I hope you guys enjoy the show. Welcome to the Derek O'Shea Show. Welcome to the revolution. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I am live everywhere. I'm live on Rumble. I'm live on Facebook. I'm live on Twitch. I'm live on Twitter. I am live on YouTube's. Be sure to like, share, subscribe. There's the subscription. Be sure to subscribe. We're watching news around the world right now. There's all kinds of stuff like right here. We got large anti-war protests happening right now in St. Petersburg, which I've seen that thousands of people are already being arrested currently for that. I've seen TikTok videos of kids being posted, which is funny. We all made fun of TikTok for so long, and now it's one of the best ways in which to get live feeds around the world. It's better than Snapchat. It's better than Instagram. So you're going to get a lot of feeds and stuff like that from TikTok, but here's right now in St. Petersburg, and Boris Johnson and England is talking about what's going on as we wait for President Biden. He's still got about 27 minutes until the press conference starts. He delayed it an hour, of course. It's very, very like our president, but we'll check around, see what's going around the world, and I'll keep you updated as much as possible. And I always think this is on Russian television, which is the irony of that.
Regime to an end, because I think in the end he will pay a huge price for what he has done, and I know that this House will want to make it so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome and support the measures outlined by the Prime Minister today? Putin is a gangster and a despot who has been trying to undermine and subvert democracy across the world for years. One of the tools that he uses is through political donations to political parties, including in this country. Will the Prime Minister commit today to ridding the democracy in London from to ridding Russian money out of democracy in this country?
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker.
Blake Drummond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and Poland today triggered Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty, and I think I heard...
Let's check it. Keelan, I think it must be Worstman's. I think this must be the Worstman's. Yeah, I think Biden is doing a terrible job. He's going to go down as one of the worst presidents ever.
I thank you very much. He's completely
right.
Just will. That's why one of the first things
you're only a propagandist if you believe otherwise.
In Estonia, in the way that I've described, and our Canadian friends are strengthening their presence in.
Right here, right now, we have in Kyiv. We have people burning intelligence documents. Of course, you've seen a lot of jokes where people saying it's Hunter Biden and his dad's documents being lit on fire. But, yeah, so lots of just so much stuff going on right now. I've seen a lot of protests going on in Russia currently. Let's check on other news.
Going to be in order to help deal with displaced people that are coming west from Kyiv here to Lviv. They're going to open up, we believe, the soccer pitch in order to try and house some displaced people, at least temporarily. They're trying to figure out how to deal with that right now. More broadly, the fighting continues all across this country, and we're told that less than half of the Russian troops that have been massed on Ukraine's borders have even been deployed yet, and Russian air power has not yet fully been unleashed. So as distressing it is to watch these missiles fall and to have troops move in on Ukraine from 3 different sides, it seems as if the real bulk
I generally
of the
don't
Russian advance
know what
hasn't
the
even
end of
started
this
yet.
is going to look like. Do you guys?
So, Phil, as Ukrainians begin to flee, what can you tell us about the infrastructure for a potentially large number of refugees to cross the border there into Poland where you are?
Kira, this is really kind of a worst-case scenario for Ukrainians. They saw Russian forces in the Donbas region, and they were hoping that President Putin wouldn't go west, but now he's coming in from the north, the south, and pushing west. So the only place for Ukrainians to come really is this way. You heard Aaron say they may temporarily house them there in Lviv where he is, but when they come to the border, this is why our troops are here. 5,000 or so of the 82nd Airborne here along the border trying to help Polish authorities figure out what to do when they get here. And they are coming. Our Matt Gutman is a bit south of where I am here at a border crossing and is reporting he spoke to one.
Biden has been presented with options for a massive cyber attacks against Russia, including disrupting the internet across Russia, shutting off power, and stopping trains in their tracks. Great. Nothing says escalation like we're going to do some cyber attacks too.
It is happening now.
And Phil, you've had a chance to talk with more Ukrainians who have already made.
Guys, feel free to share this feed everywhere. I'm going to be going live for a long time because this is a historical day.
Kira, this was something I spoke to a young family in the square just behind me here in Lublin today, and I said, where have you come from? And the young mother told me that they came here to Lublin last night before the attack started because they were so worried about that attack and their 1-year-old boy, Marco, who they brought with them.
Look at that traffic
jam. They came over here, thought they'd spend the night and
that
then
is
go
crazy.
back. Now they find themselves here in Lublin, Poland, unable to know when they are going to go back. But they were concerned at the same time because Nadia's parents are over in Lviv, and she is desperately concerned about them because she's watching the news and hearing that Russian troops are nearing Lviv as well. We spoke to a group of other people here, Ukrainians who are wrapping themselves in the Ukrainian flag, singing Ukrainian songs,
cyber attack
for their relatives who are in Ukraine. They live here in Poland. They're concerned. But as you know from the story I just told you about Nadia and her family, Ukrainians are coming across the border, and they are coming in mass right now.
Again, thanks guys so much for joining me. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, all that crap if you want to. If you don't, I don't care. But I'm live on Rumble, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and we're going to be going live for a long time, and I'm going to be bouncing around to different news segments.
Cyber attacks already underway. The stark warning for NATO countries include.
All right, let's check to see what's going on in
to
our English buddies.
The current intent into frameworks that cement our intent over time, because he is betting on the fact that it won't be.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, because the plan that the G7 have agreed on and our friends and partners have agreed on is that Putin must fail. Putin must not succeed in this venture. But we've got to put in place all the steps we need to take, diplomatically, economically, and yes, militarily, in order to ensure that that is the case. And that's what we're doing.
Very good.
The Prime Minister is right to have set out the most stringent possible set of sanctions.
What's this?
Helena, I can hear it in your...
Please save Ukrainian men, women, and children.
Helena, I can hear it in your voice. I mean, this is a...
Citizens. Block Russia from SWIFT. I beg you. Please save our people. Another dozen of people, and maybe hundreds of people, might be murdered tonight. Please.
I can't imagine what that feels like.
Of practice and principle is the test of democratic politics.
I know, like, politicians were talking about war, sanctions, and stuff like that, but there are actual people of like, it's hard to like compartmentalize, disassociate, take yourself away from a situation, and say it's happening on the other side of the world, but it's affecting real people.
With those countries close to Ukraine, where nerves will be frayed, and that will he send them an urgent message that this House and this nation will always stand alongside and behind free nations.
the right honourable gentleman, as so often, is precisely right, and that's why, together with my right honourable friends, the Defence Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, we've been visiting Poland, Romania, the Balts, all those who are now feeling such.
Check everywhere else. All right, got a commercial.
Putin, his address this morning, what was it like and what did he say, and maybe what was his demeanor like?
So it's a very interesting question. Some journalists have determined.
I don't like that feed.
Bringing natural gas that was to bring natural gas from Russia to Germany would in fact be essentially called off, canceled, has gone through. But Russia understands domestic politics within each of our allies, including the United States, as much as his own situation. And that's really what he's gambling on here, is the fact that over time, as the global economy really endures a real jolt at the moment, as we're seeing on the stock market and potentially with the energy markets, that will weaken the resolve of some of the West as they continue to move forward with these sanctions. But what the president is insisting right now is use it in the domestic context, but also in the foreign policy context, that the American people and that the world are prepared to do what it takes to prevent the kind of aggression, the kind of incursions that we're seeing from President Putin, because, as he has said, it may not stop with Ukraine.
All right, NBC's Mike Memley and Josh Letterman for us there from Washington. Gentlemen, thank you both.
Now, President Biden is set to speak in the next few minutes. We believe he's expected to announce a new wave of sanctions against Russia. But as the world condemns the invasion of Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin has shown he is increasingly willing to go it alone.
Yeah, obviously. The sanctions are not working. He doesn't care.
Welcome back to our special coverage here on ABC News Live. U.S. intelligence is warning of a different battlefield than the one we're seeing on the streets of Ukraine right now. Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Mark Warner, fresh off a trip to allied countries, warning of the potential of Russian cyber attacks that might even draw in NATO countries, including the United States. How real is the risk of cyber attacks? ABC's Byron Pitts has more for us.
The scene is as familiar as it is.
All right, so they're doing recaps. Cyber attacks is the new thing that's been popping up everywhere that everyone believes is the next train of events. Protesters again in Ukraine. Oh, St. Petersburg in Russia. I've seen this video already. Anti-war in Moscow. The police taking them down. God, it looks like Canada. Jeez. Crazy. Here's in Moscow right now. It's good to see that, you know, they did a poll and not a lot of Russians are very excited about going to war, so they don't want that. Another, let's see what Boris Johnson's talking about.
Being taken, I think, probably the most powerful ever taken by any country.
We wait for Biden.
And Russia will no longer be able to raise.
Just hope he doesn't push the
debt,
conference back
UK
another
markets.
hour.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Prime Minister what support we will be providing Ukrainian citizens settled in the UK who wish to reunite with their family members still residing in Ukraine. Many have watched their cities rapidly get caught up in this conflict and are keen to know what more we could be doing to support them to reunite their families.
Mr. Speaker, we will make sure that we support Ukrainian nationals who need to leave to visit to come to this country to meet their relatives. Of course, we'll do that.
Stephen McPartland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud the Prime Minister in this country are leading international support for our friends.
See what else is going
wants to, they could basically turn the lights off in Ukraine and then walk in.
They absolutely could turn the lights off. In fact, they've done it on 2 occasions in 2015 and 2016.
But it's not what they've done already. It's what they can do.
Russia is pretty consistent in their not only capability, but intent to cause disruption. If we look back to the 2015 cyber attack in Ukraine that took down their electric power system, happened again in 2016, going after the transmission electric system. So it's consistent that they're on the big stage for showing the intent to kind of.
Okay, we're just
advisor.
I want to ask you one last question, and as I do that, I'm going to show our viewers some brand new video that we're getting in. This is of American forces in Latvia, which is to the north of Ukraine, north of Belarus, which borders Ukraine. And this brand new video is showing what we knew was going to be a fortification of NATO countries in that region, right along the Baltic Sea. As we look at this video, I'll ask you, what kind of risk does this invasion of Ukraine pose to NATO countries, to countries that neighbor Ukraine but are a part of the NATO alliance?
Well, you raise a very interesting issue. It's one of the reasons why we sent the Division Ready Force, the 82nd Airborne Division, there in the first place some time ago. It's important that we shore up the morale of our NATO allies. I mean, it's very dangerous for our allies in northern and in northeastern Europe when they see what's happening in the southeastern part of Europe. They're very much concerned that we will not defend them. And so this is a demonstration
How does this weird stone bathroom help prevent slip?
But it's a demonstration. Well, we probably are not going to. Right. But it's a demonstration that we have made a commitment to our allies along the eastern edge, and we will continue to do so. But they're not going to fight.
All right, NBC News military analyst, Medal of Honor recipient Jack Jacobs. We appreciate your time today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Russia's attack on Ukraine is decimating global markets today, and the price of oil is now at an 8-year high. Let's go ahead and bring in CNBC correspondent Christina Parts.
Because we're not energy independent. I mean, what do you expect? You put sanctions on a country that we get a lot of oil from, and then you think it's not going to affect us?
Saying that they do want to take a bipartisan approach to this.
We could just start drilling here.
They believe that there should be tough sanctions. He did say today that he...
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. In an earlier response, the Prime Minister suggested that this country would welcome people who were reuniting with family here. I have a constituent who's Ukrainian, but a British citizen who's trying to bring her mother from Ukraine, but being turned down because she is over 18. Her mother is on her own, has no family, so naturally...
It's kind of crazy that Russian television news network is showing that.
In your conversation with Byron, I have a few more questions for you. We just heard you talk about how Russia has the capability to launch offensive cyber attacks against its enemies and is doing so right now in Ukraine. Talk a little bit more about the systems, the civilian or otherwise, that can be compromised during a full-scale military operation like we're seeing.
Well, the Russians have the capability to go after military communication systems.
This guy is Fox
News
News reporter on the ground.
Of course, are trying to coordinate their forces against this massive assault from the Russian military, going after cell phone communications, traditional telecommunication systems, wired communication systems could be a priority for the Russians as well. And then in terms of affecting the population, trying to sow disinformation.
Dear President Vladimir Putin, I'm so sorry that I was not your mother. If I was your mother, you would have been so loved, held in the arms of joyous light. Never would the stories plight the world unfurled before our eyes, a pure demise of nations sitting peaceful under a night sky. If I was your mother, the world would have been warm. So much laughter and joy, and nothing would harm. I can't imagine the stain, the soul-stealing pain that the little boy you must have seen and believed, and the formulation of thought quickly taught that you lived in a cruel, unjust world. Is this why you now decide no one will get the best of you?
Biden's going to speak soon.
Is this why you do not hide nor away shy from taking back the world? Was it because so early...
Are we just doing poetry right now? I'm confused.
For you, Dmitry, can the United States and its NATO allies get involved in this, be thrown into the cyber fray? If they are, what does that look like?
So I worry a lot about escalation. It's very much the case that the Russians are focused right now purely on Ukraine, both in cyber and the kinetic domain. But there is huge potential that this spirals out of control, depending on what the United States does. There is reporting right now that the US government and President Biden are being
in a subway station
given
like
options for cyber retaliation against the Russians, targeting their rail infrastructure, their internet infrastructure. The Russians will not take that sitting down. They will retaliate and potentially retaliate against our energy infrastructure and our financial systems.
Dmitry Alperovich, thank you so much for your conversation with Byron and for your conversation just now with me. We appreciate it. Kira?
Phil, thanks so much. President Biden set to address the nation this hour. We will bring it to you live as soon as he steps up to the mic. And as the world watches the escalating tension fueled by Russia, Ukrainians feeling fortunate about getting out. We hear from one young woman who describes what it was like to cross.
What's this?
And a little bit. And a little bit of chicken fried. Cold beer on a Friday.
Oh my God. What is this? Listen to this. Oh, could you imagine just watching this live if you were in like Ukraine?
And a little bit of chicken fried. Cold beer on a Friday.
That is so freaking stupid. Oh, know your audience. Yeah, that's sad. That's just really bad timing. That's beyond bad timing.
Lots of Ukrainian platforms are currently getting targeted like this for expressing their position and their opinion.
Aaron, the information is being used by investigative journalists to really build this picture of what's happening in the region. Some of the videos can be low quality or even poorly framed, but if you watch them, they show exactly what is happening at this specific moment in time, which this group tells me is valuable for possible
Okay. We got press briefing. This is supposed to start. Biden is supposed to start speaking soon. We'll see how that goes.
You need to know.
Seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
I don't know.
They see the attack on Ukraine as they would see an attack of their father on their mother, because there's such intimate family relationships between these two groups. And today, thousands of Russians are protesting in cities.
All right. As much as I love the English accent.
Украинка прилетела с Германии сегодня ночью, но случилась беда. Где-то в 6 утра с аэропорта нас эвакуировали вместе с дочкой. Все бежали из аэропорта, потому что было какое-то нападение со скоростью света. Очень много людей, 2 сотни, 3 сотни людей на улице, не знали, куда идти. Автобусы не ходят, машины мало пробегают рядом. И потом мы услышали взрывы какие-то, какую-то стрельбу. Как можно дальше мы бежали от этого аэропорта. Это было реально очень страшно. Я сейчас говорю, меня реально трясет.
Ми працюємо тут в Києві. Коли в хостелі, з дому подзвонили, що на Краснопольській границі стріляють. І ми зібралися, почали збиратися їхати додому. Ну так, як виїхати ми не можемо, ми стоїмо і не знаємо, що нам робити. Дома маленькі діти.
Ну, ми прокинулись від вибухів, було чутно. Спершу десь 5 вибухів, потім ще декілька, ну не зрозуміло, чи то були. Тому ми злі, але ми прагнемо миру і, ну, допоможе нам Бог.
Страх, тривога, і дуже переживаємо за дітей, тому що у нас границя дуже близько дома.
Потом, когда узнали, что поезда отменяются, много людей выходило отсюда и плакало просто. Потому что все движение, даже украинское внутреннее движение поездов было закрыто.
Ну, сегодня как бы мы ожидаем.
Biden's supposed to be talking soon. We'll see.
Сейчас муж на 16-м этаже в Броварах в квартире, понимаете, он инвалид. И без меня он не может выйти. Старшая дочка у меня в Мариуполе. Вот сейчас звоним, созваниваемся. Где они? Раховки. Да, внучку. Я встречаю внучку. И хочу забрать в Бровары, потому что в Мариуполе, если поезда не будет, она не уедет.
Я живу на Украине, еду в Кировоград, но на Кировоград вообще нету никаких билетов. Мне приходится ехать в объездную, на Знаменку. У меня было...
Поїдемо спершу на метро до окраїн міста, звідти спробуємо на автівці на маршрутному бусику. Варіантів в нас небагато, ті кішки зроблено на операцію, їй потрібно в тепло, тому...
Нет, я с Украины никуда не собираюсь уезжать. У нас в Броварах уже квартира. Мы как бы выбрали Порошенко. У нас был прекрасный президент, которого мы все поддерживали. И поэтому я никуда не собираюсь. Ни моя старшая дочь, ни младшая дочь. Все мы находимся.
So what are military experts predicting Putin will do now after this initial invasion?
Oh, they're saying that once he secures the various airports and infrastructure, he's going to make a play for Kiev. He's going directly after Zelensky, and it's just a question of when.
And is there an expectation that that is when this would end, or do we see movement beyond the Ukrainian borders?
I think the Ukrainian army it's definitely a David versus Goliath kind of mismatch here. The Ukrainian army is not going to be able to resist the Russian army, but I don't think the Ukrainians are going to give.
What is this?
Past that, we'll fight for every. One of the things that we've heard from Ukrainian officials over the last few hours is, diplomacy is still our first goal here. Preventing further Russian incursion without fighting is our first goal. But if it gets past that, we'll fight for every inch of territory in every city.
And they will.
So how bloody do you think this can get? How much fight do you think the Ukrainians have here?
I think Ukrainians have 150%, 500% fight. I mean, they're going to fight like hell. And actually, they just passed a law in which guns are allowed to be used in freely in Ukraine. So that is a preparation. So if every Ukrainian takes a gun, Russians don't have a prayer. I mean, the military can fight, but it would be Ukrainians, I think, really ready to die. That's why I continue to insist that big incursion, and that's why, once again, from my point of view...
Oh my God, you broke me, dude. Kevin, Ukraine plus 1,200. God,
diplomacy was wrong.
That's so wrong.
Diplomacy was wrong to say Putin is going to go in Kiev because he lost grip on reality, but he's not suicidal. He wants to go in history as a defender of the Russian lands and kind of gather out some degree, but he doesn't want to go into history as the creator of another war, because no Russian, even the most patriotic ones, want to fight right now.
One of the things that we've heard.
Yep. Second Amendment's important, I guess. And nukes are important as we try to denuclearize every country out there. I mean, I guess would things be different if Ukraine had nukes is always going to be the question.
Very high heating bills are going to go up even more.
So what steps is the Biden administration doing right now to try to eliminate the pain we are all feeling at the pump?
Oh, my God.
We are hearing
Bombing
so much from the
hospitals
White
in
House
Ukraine?
that as they are prepared to
douche.
announce these severe consequences, they're saying
That's
we're
insane.
also trying to take steps to alleviate.
Hey, you bombing hospitals.
Consumer. The Biden administration is aware, as much as we all are, that inflation is already a major problem here in the U.S. economy. We've seen price.
Yeah, you think prices are bad now?
To try and set in train now a process whereby Putin himself ends up in the dock in a court. Norman Burkitt said, who was the alternate British judge at Nuremberg, said at Nuremberg, initiating a war of aggression is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. He must be brought to a court of law and end his days in prison, mustn't he?
It's hard to tell you're living in like a crazy day in history that they'll write movies and stuff about until you're already there.
Three main points of entry into Ukraine that are coming both from the Russian border and the Belarusian border that are homing in on the population centers. There is a movement.
I want like
Russia's actions here. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson announcing today what he calls the largest and most severe package of economic sanctions Russia has ever seen.
Our reporters have been covering every angle of this breaking story as it has been unfolding. So let's go ahead and start with NBC News correspondent Cal Perry, who has been on the ground, I think, for weeks at this point there in Ukraine. Cal, can you just tell us what you're seeing, what you're hearing? I mean, so much has changed. You know, we all woke up to the news that this happened at 5 a.m. this morning local time. Can you just describe how quickly things
I was watching it last night. I don't know about you guys. I almost went live last night.
Yeah, I mean, Morgan, you're nailing it. Things turned on a dime this morning in a way that I think surprised a lot of people here. For weeks, we had been hearing the Ukrainian government downplaying the threat from Russia while Washington had played it up. And the Ukrainian president was very clear in the last few weeks he did not want a panic. He did not want to create a situation where people were fleeing to the border. And all of that explosions in the capital, when we saw Russian we saw an immediate exodus from the capital where tens of thousands of people tried to leave all at once, some of them making it as far as where I am here in Lviv, some of them making it as far as the Polish border about 50 miles from here. Some folks, though, were unable to get out of the city. There's been a run on gas. There's been a run on the banks. And while all of that has been happening, Morgan, you've had these cyber attacks. So some folks who go to an ATM suddenly can't get money, and they're trying to get their families out. It is a...
That's why you diversify your funds. You don't put all your money and all your valuables in the bank. Just... You can't,
vowed an all-out defense against Russia. How is their military sort of...
Stuff like this makes like the people that are end of timers or whatever, preppers, look not look crazy every single time. Let's see what's going on. Still waiting on Biden. Anything new? Information popping up. Been presented with options for massive unprecedented cyber attacks. So we're doing the cyber attacks thing. Okay. So we're attacking Russia? I mean, seriously. Russian forces in Chernobyl. So they're getting some... That's what balls look like. You gonna protest in Russia over this war? You have balls of steel. That's just how it is. These people get it. It's freaking awesome. All right, let's go back to see what's going on.
Structure pieces. They want to make this country ungovernable. It's not clear how wide this invasion will be, but the purpose of it is clear.
All right, Cal Perry for us there. Cal, we cannot thank you for your reporting. I know you have probably barely slept, and you have covered every single twist and turn for weeks, and we cannot thank you enough. We appreciate you, man.
Now, the United States, along with its allies, swiftly moved to place sanctions on Russia after its military forces were ordered into Ukrainian territory. But can these sanctions actually slow Russia down?
No.
Have this clock.
All right. You're still talking?
Okay.
And
that was how we deal with long COVID. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister didn't comment on long COVID at all. He talked about Omicron as being a less severe variant, and he said that COVID should now be treated like the flu. But this overlooks the fact that the debilitating symptoms of long COVID are not impacted by the severity of someone's initial COVID symptoms. You can have very mild COVID symptoms initially.
They're talking about COVID right now? What? Okay, sure. Yeah, you can get COVID.
Had a pretty large diplomatic.
But there's also like a nuclear power taking over a country right now. I guess that's a big deal. I don't know.
Part of the country, much safer. And
I mean, seriously, what in the heck is going on? What's going on? People taking shelter. That's just some more anti-war protests. Thousands of people have already been arrested. There's police in Moscow.
Can you get it, man? Can you film them?
No, folks, this is not Canada. This is Russia.
Will immediately allocate $20 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund to meet urgent needs. We and our humanitarian partners are committed to staying and delivering to support people in Ukraine at their time of need. United Nations staff are working on both sides of the contact line, always guided by the humanitarian principles of neutrality, impartiality, humanity, and independence.
Allocating a bunch of money. Still waiting on our president to start talking. Only a matter of time, apparently.
And it spreads to Poland and other places, shuts down hospitals. We saw that with the NotPetya attack that was attributed to Russia many years ago. And Warner was actually expressing a kind of glad surprise that we haven't seen the kind of massive cyber attacks by Russia against Ukraine that many people expected. And so he and others are saying, you know, let's wait a second here. And so it's really not clear, to answer your question, what Biden will do and whether he will accept these recommendations. But there's another camp that says, look, we've been developing these cyber options for a reason, for just this kind of eventuality where we don't want to drop a bomb on anyone. This is not a kinetic action, but this is a way to punish an adversary that has violated international law and done something terrible. So that's the debate that's unfolding right now, and we'll have to see where President Biden ends up.
So, Ken, let's talk about the Ukrainians a little bit here. What can you tell us about the state of the Ukrainian military and you know, what their capabilities are to defend themselves against Russia?
So this is an ongoing question right now, and the fog of war is clouding our ability to see this. I asked Senator Warner that, and he's getting, obviously, briefings from the CIA, and he said he didn't know the answer. He did say that he's been told that the Ukrainians are putting up a fight. You know, for example, the Ukraine said they shot down 5 Russian planes. We don't know whether that's true. You know, we had reported in recent days that Ukraine's air defenses were not really up to snuff, and that's, I think, proven out. The Russians appear to have air dominance, and they appear to be, you know, taking dramatic steps to degrade the Ukrainian military. And Warner told me he believes that Putin's objective is not just to surround.
That's going to extend the clock and allow this to, I think, shift into ongoing and maybe kind of persistent tensions. If China doesn't help them, I think Russia's on a limited string here. They can only afford to keep this up for so long.
All right, so if Russia's on a limited string here, can only afford to keep this going for so long, what about Ukraine and putting Ukraine and Russia up against each other? Who's going to be able to last the longest?
Yeah, you know, I don't mean to make that analysis and take it lightly. That in it, I recognize the Ukrainian military is so outmatched. The Russian military is formidable, and the Ukrainian response capacity is not even really in the same league. So I don't think military resistance is going to last for very long. The Ukrainian people are showing a lot of resilience, and there will be a resistance. But without outside military assistance, the Ukrainian military will be outmatched and overrun. I think we're seeing that play out before.
Of course it will. Okay, so they're done with that. That RT News. I'm just curious what RT News would be like. Let's see. Still waiting. I bet Putin's going to talk at the same time as Biden.
Есть дырка, которая пробила полностью стену насквозь. Вылетела с той стороны, утес пробил. Благо, что не загорелось. Потому что если бы загорелось, а пулю с утеса нашли бронебойно-зажигательную. Вот это бьют нас таким красивым. А с той стороны там стекол тоже нет. Там...
Okay. As the people in Kharkiv and Kiev, et cetera, would be. Now, we've seen that the main first assault has been on those larger first and second size in terms of population cities that are further north. But if you watch those two places to the south also, that could indicate how far Putin intends to go with this and how strategic he intends to be about it, because Odessa That's a foothold that's very near the west. It's a seacoast, but it would change the stakes of where this ends up going and how far it goes, and what the Ukrainians do in response. Because again, Russia's got a lot of firepower and a lot of boots and a lot of sailors ready to go at this, but holding a country the size of Ukraine with a population that's as resistant to that sort of dominance as Ukraine at a time when the Western world may be sanctioning you extremely heavily, that also is a potentially untenable situation for Russia. So this is a whole bunch of unknowns here about how that is going to go forward.
Yeah, we're still waiting on Biden. I think it's interesting. I can't tell which news I should watch. I should do a live poll.
They be impacted and could
I love a fake cybersecurity. This is like their B-roll. Cybersecurity B-roll. Play it. I'm still waiting on Biden to start talking.
Speeches, the one this week as well as one he had last week, where he's
explaining what's going on the Twitterverse,
the American people.
Much as I hate
think he's probably
Twitter.
not going to shy away at how serious this has become since the attack began overnight. I think he really is going to make sure that that point hits home. And I think from what I am seeing from members of Congress who have been coming out with their own bold statements on what should be done next, I think they'll also be listening to this as well and preparing what to do next week when they return. But I think right now he has the responsibility as president to tell everyone where America stands right now, what are these new developments, and how America is going to respond next. So we know earlier this week he said that he had tranches of sanctions that would be revealed over the coming days, and I think right now, because of what
internet is
happened last
undefeated.
night, he's in the position to discuss that a little bit further. So I think these speeches are twofold, where they're going to be for education's sake, making sure American people know what's going on, and they're going to be about the specific steps the United States plans to take. And it's always, I always say this, even on the Hill when we're waiting on hearings, always be mindful when we see these long delays. That means, it doesn't mean anything
These people
crazy
have balls,
happening
man.
behind the scenes.
I
but
just can't
it does
imagine.
mean that,
it takes a lot of cojones
this is
to
being
know
taken
that you're probably going to end up in prison for a long time, and you're still standing up for
as
it.
it comes out, I believe Tyler
Amazing.
also alluded to this as well. A few days ago, when there was a little bit of a delay, that Biden was in the Oval Office making sure that he had his messaging correct. So I would suspect that that's part of what might be the delay right now. We don't know exactly, but anytime you see these long delays, it also points to the seriousness of the situation.
We expect the president shortly. James Homan,
Still waiting on
let's go
Biden.
to you for this question of just how far sanctions can go. And we've heard a message from President Biden up till now of keeping a door open for diplomacy. But James, is that door, President Biden's coming out, so we'll hold those questions until after we hear the President of the United States speak. This is live coverage from the Washington Post.
Sorry to keep you waiting. Good afternoon. The Russian military has begun a brutal assault on the people of Ukraine. Without provocation, without justification, without necessity, this is a premeditated attack. Vladimir Putin has been planning this for months, as we've been saying all along. He moved more than 175,000 troops, military equipment and positions along the Ukrainian border. He moved blood supplies into position and built a field hospital, which tells you all you need to know about his intentions all along. He rejected every good faith effort the United States and our allies and partners made to address our mutual security concerns through dialogue to avoid needless conflict and avert human suffering. For weeks, we have been warning that this would happen. And now it's unfolding largely as we predicted. In the past week, we've seen shelling increase in the Donbass, a region in eastern Ukraine controlled by Russian-backed separatists. The Russian government has perpetrated cyber attacks against Ukraine. We saw a staged political theater in Moscow, outlandish and baseless claims that Ukraine was about to invade and launch a war against Russia, that Ukraine was prepared to use chemical weapons, that Ukraine committed a genocide. Without any evidence, we saw a flagrant violation of international law. in attempting to unilaterally create two new so-called republics on sovereign Ukrainian territory. And at the very moment that the United Nations Security Council was meeting to stand up for Ukraine's sovereignty, to stave off invasion, Putin declared his war. Within moments, missile strikes began to fall on historic cities across Ukraine. Then came the air raids, followed by tanks and troops rolling in. We've been transparent with the world. We've shared declassified evidence about Russia's plans and cyber attacks and false pretexts so that there could be no confusion or cover-up about what Putin was doing. Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia. This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time. We have purposely designed these sanctions to maximize the long-term impact on Russia and to minimize the impact on the United States and our allies. I want to be clear, the United States is not doing this alone. For months, we've been building a coalition of partners representing well more than half the global economy. 27 members of the European Union, including France, Germany, Italy, as well as the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and many others, to amplify the joint impact of our response. I just spoke with the G7 leaders this morning, and we're in full and total agreement. We will limit Russia's ability to do business in dollars, euros, pounds, and yen to be part of the global economy. We'll limit their ability to do that. We're going to stunt the ability to finance and grow the Russian military. We're going to impose and we're going to impair their ability to compete in high-tech 21st century economy. We've already seen the impact of our actions on Russia's currency and the ruble, which early today hit its weakest level ever in history. The Russia stock market plunged today. The Russian government borrowing rate spiked by over 15%. In today's actions, we've now sanctioned Russian banks that together hold around $1 trillion in assets. We've cut off Russia's largest bank, a bank that holds more than 1/3 of Russia's banking assets by itself, cut it off from the U.S. financial system. And today, we're also blocking 4 more major banks. That means every asset they have in America will be frozen. This includes VTB, the second largest bank in Russia, which has $250 billion in assets. As promised, we're also adding the names to the list of Russian elites and their family members that we're sanctioning as well. As I said on Tuesday, these are people who personally gain from the Kremlin's policies, and they should share in the pain. We will keep up this drumbeat of those designations against corrupt billionaires in the days ahead. On Tuesday, we stopped the Russian government from raising money from U.S. or European investors. Now we're going to apply the same restrictions to Russia's largest state-owned enterprises, companies with assets that exceed $1.4 trillion. Some of the most powerful impacts of our actions will come over time as we squeeze Russia's access to finances and technology for strategic sectors of its economy and degrade its industrial capacity for years to come. Between our actions and those of our allies and partners, we estimate that we'll cut off more than half of Russia's high-tech imports. It will strike a blow to their ability to continue to modernize their military. It'll degrade their aerospace industry, including their space program. It'll hurt their ability to build ships, reducing their ability to compete economically. And it will be a major hit to Putin's long-term strategic ambitions. And we're preparing to do more. In addition to the economic penalties we're imposing, we're also taking steps to defend our NATO allies, particularly in the East. Tomorrow, NATO will convene a summit. We'll be there to bring together the leaders of 30 allied nations and close partners to affirm our solidarity and to map out the next steps we will take to further strengthen all aspects of our NATO alliance. Although we provided over $650 million in defensive assistance to Ukraine just this last year, let me say it again. Our forces are not and will not be engaged in the conflict with Russia in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight in Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies and reassure those allies in the East. As I made crystal clear, the United States will defend every inch of NATO territory with the full force of American power. And the good news is, NATO is more united and more determined than ever. There is no doubt that the United States and every NATO ally will meet our Article 5 commitments, which says that an attack on one is an attack on all. Over the past few weeks, I ordered thousands of additional forces to Germany and Poland as part of our commitment to NATO. On Tuesday, in response to Russia's aggressive action, including its troop presence in Belarus and the Black Sea, I've authorized the deployment of ground and air forces already stationed in Europe to NATO's eastern flank allies, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Romania. Our allies have also been stepping up, adding the other allies, the rest of NATO, adding their own forces and capabilities to ensure collective defense. And today, within hours of Russia's unleashing its assault, NATO came together and authorized and activated an activation of response plans. This will enable NATO's high readiness forces to deploy and when and where they are needed to protect our NATO allies on the eastern boundaries of Europe. And now I'm authorizing additional U.S. force capabilities to deploy to Germany as part of NATO's response, including some of the U.S.-based forces that the Department of Defense placed on standby weeks ago. I've also spoken with Defense Secretary Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, about preparations for additional moves should they become necessary to protect our NATO allies and support the greatest military alliance in the history of the world, NATO. As we respond, my administration is using the tools, every tool at its disposal, to protect American families and businesses from rising prices at the gas pump. You know, we're taking active steps to bring down the cost, and American oil and gas companies should not exploit this moment to hike their prices to raise profits. You know, in our sanctions package, we specifically designed to allow energy payments to continue.
This is insane.
We are closely monitoring energy supplies for any disruption. We've been coordinating with major oil-producing and consuming countries toward our common interest to secure global energy supplies. We are actively working with countries around the world to elevate collective release from the strategic petroleum reserves of major energy-consuming countries. And the United States will release additional barrels of oil as conditions warrant. I know this is hard and that Americans are already hurting. I will do everything in my power to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. This is critical to me. But this aggression cannot go unanswered. If it did, the consequences for America would be much worse. America stands up to bullies. We stand up for freedom. This is who we are. Let me also repeat the warning I made last week. If Russia pursues cyber attacks against our companies, our critical infrastructure, we are prepared to respond. For months, we've been working closely with the private sector to harden our cyber defenses, sharpen our ability to respond to Russian cyber attacks as well. I spoke last night to President Zelensky of Ukraine, and I assured him that the United States, together with our allies and partners in Europe, will support the Ukrainian people as they defend their country. We'll provide humanitarian relief to ease their suffering. And in the early days of this conflict, Russia propaganda outlets will keep trying to hide the truth and claim success for its military operation against a made-up threat. But history has shown, time and again, how swift gains in territory eventually give way to grinding occupations, acts of mass civil disobedience, and strategic dead ends. The next few weeks and months will be hard on the people of Ukraine. Putin has unleashed a great pain on them, but the Ukrainian people have known 30 years of independence. They have repeatedly shown that they will not tolerate anyone who tries to take their country backwards. This is a dangerous moment for all of Europe, for the freedom around the world. Putin has committed an assault on the very principles that uphold the global peace. But now, the entire world sees clearly what Putin and his Kremlin allies are really all about.
Get together, Biden. You got to look strong.
This was never about a genuine security concerns on their part. It was always about naked aggression, about Putin's desire for empire by any means necessary, by bullying Russia's neighbors through coercion and corruption, by changing borders by force, and ultimately by choosing a war without a cause. Putin's actions betray his sinister vision for the future of our world, one where nations take what they want by force. But it is a vision that the United States and freedom-loving nations everywhere will oppose with every tool of our considerable power. The United States and our allies and partners will emerge from this stronger, more united, more determined, and more purposeful. And Putin's aggression against Ukraine will end up costing Russia dearly, economically and strategically. We will make sure of that. Putin will be a pariah on the international stage. Any nation that countenances Russia's naked aggression against Ukraine will be stained by association. When the history of this era is written, Putin's choice to make a totally unjustifiable war on Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger. Liberty, democracy, human dignity, these are the forces far more powerful than fear and oppression. They cannot be extinguished by tyrants like Putin and his armies. They cannot be erased by from people's hearts and hopes by any amount of violence and intimidation. They endure. In the contest between democracy and autocracy, between sovereignty and subjugation, make no mistake, freedom will prevail. God bless the people of a free and democratic Ukraine, and may God protect our troops.
Mr. President.
Associated Press.
I'm about to say, if he doesn't take questions.
So do you have any plans to speak with President Putin at this point, and what interactions have you had with the Russian government?
I heard the first part. Do I have any plans to speak with Putin at this point, and what?
What communications have you had with the Kremlin as far as military operations in Ukraine and making sure this does not spiral into a larger conflict?
Well, it's a large conflict already. The way we're going to ensure it's not going to aspire to a larger conflict is by providing all the forces needed in the Eastern European nations that are members of NATO. NATO is more united than it's ever been, and I have no plans to talk with Putin. Wall Street Journal, Tarina.
Mr. President, you didn't mention SWIFT in your sanctions that you announced. Is there a reason why the U.S. Isn't doing that? Is there a disagreement among allies regarding SWIFT and whether Russia should be allowed to be a part of it?
The sanctions that we've proposed on all their banks are of equal consequence, maybe more consequence than SWIFT, number one. Number two, it is always an option, but right now that's not the position that the rest of Europe wishes to take. Cecilia Vega, ABC.
Sir, sanctions clearly have not been enough to deter Vladimir Putin to this point. What is going to stop him? How and when does this end? And do you see him trying to go beyond Ukraine? And a second question I'll just give to you now. This statement that he gave last night, the threat that he gave, the West will face consequences greater than any you have faced in history. Is he threatening a nuclear strike?
I have no idea what he's threatening. I know what he has done, number one. And number two, no one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening. It has to show, this is going to take time, and we have to show resolve. So he knows what's coming. And so the people of Russia know what he's brought on them. That's what this is all about. This is going to take time. It's not going to occur. He's going to say, oh my God, these sanctions are coming, I'm going to stand down. He's going to test the resolve of the West to see if we stay together, and we will. We will, and it will impose significant costs on him.
Will he go beyond Ukraine, sir? Do you see him going beyond?
Yes.
Peter. Just really quick. First, markets are down.
and gas prices are up. I know you always stress the difference between Wall Street and Main Street, but everybody seems to be in for some economic pain. How economically painful is it going to get for people in this country? And I do have one more question.
First of all, there's no doubt that when a major nuclear power attacks and invades another country, that the world is going to respond, and markets can respond all over the world. So there's no doubt about that, number one. Number two, the notion that this is going to last for a long time is highly unlikely as long as we continue to stay resolved in imposing the sanctions we're going to impose on Russia, period. What's the next question? I'm sorry.
The next question is, did you underestimate Putin, and would you still describe him the way that you did in the summer as a
you could do better than this,
adversary?
Peter. It's not even that
At
bad.
the time,
good of a question.
He was. I made it clear as
How
an
about
adversary, and I said he was.
Biden, are you going to start drilling in America so it eases the pay, or are you going to open up the pipeline again? I mean, something.
I'm not a wise guy. You heard the speech he made, almost an hour's worth of speech, is why he was going into Ukraine. He has much larger ambitions in Ukraine. He wants to, in fact, reestablish the former Soviet Union. That's what this is about. And I think that his ambitions are completely contrary to the place where the rest of the world has arrived.
You're confident that these devastating sanctions are going to be as devastating as Russian missiles and bullets and tanks?
Yes, Russian bullets, missiles, and tanks in Ukraine. Yes, I am.
If sanctions cannot stop President Putin, what penalty can?
I didn't say sanctions couldn't stop him.
You've been talking about the threat of these sanctions for several weeks now.
Yes, but the threat of the sanctions and imposing the sanctions and seeing the effect of the sanctions are two different things. They're two different things. And he's going to begin to see the effect of the sanctions.
And what will that do? How will that change his mindset here, given he's
because
attacking
it will so
Ukraine
weaken
as we
his
speak?
country that he'll have to make a very, very difficult choices of whether to continue to move toward being a second-rate power or, in fact, respond.
You said in recent weeks that big nations cannot bluff when it comes to something like this. You recently said that the idea of personally sanctioning President Putin was on the table. Is that a step that you're prepared to take? And if not,
It's not a bluff, it's on the table.
sanctioning President Putin?
Yes.
Why not sanction him today, sir?
Mr. President?
Why not sanction him today, sir?
Obvious
President,
question.
If I can, you detailed some severe and swift new sanctions today and said the impact it will have over time. But given the full-scale invasion, given that you're not pursuing disconnecting Russia from what's called SWIFT, the international banking system, or other sanctions at your disposal, respectfully, sir, what more are you waiting for?
Specifically, with the sanctions we've imposed exceed SWIFT. The sanctions we imposed exceed anything that's ever been done. The sanctions we imposed have generated 2/3 of the world joining us.
George is getting upset.
Profound sanctions. Let's have a conversation in another month or so to see if they're working. Yes.
Can I ask you about Zelensky? Sir, you spoke to Vladimir Zelensky yesterday, sir.
What's the risk that we are watching the beginning of another Cold War, and is there now a complete rupture in U.S. and Russian relations?
There is a complete rupture right now in U.S.-Russian relations if they continue on this path that they're on. And in terms of a Cold War, that depends. You have the vast majority of the rest of the world in total opposition to what he's doing, from Asia to South America to Europe to around the world. And so it's going to be a cold day for Russia. The idea, you don't see a whole lot of people coming to his defense.
And are you, if I could follow up, sir, are you urging China to help isolate Russia? Are you urging China to help isolate Russia?
I'm not prepared to comment on that at the moment.
The answer is no. They're not going to do it.
No. Yeah. No. He's had his hand up a long time.
Thank you, Mr. President. How concerned are you that Putin wants to go beyond Ukraine into other countries, and the U.S. will have to get involved if he moves into NATO countries?
Well, if he did move into NATO countries, he will be involved. We will be involved. The only thing that I'm convinced of is if we don't stop now, he'll be emboldened. If we don't move against him now with these significant sanctions, he will be emboldened. Look, you know, well, anyway.
And can you talk anything more about your conversation? Mr. President.
Why not sanction Putin directly today?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sir, India, which is a major defense partner of the United States, is India fully with you on the issue of Ukraine and Russia?
Does the Defense Department of the United States?
Sir, India is one of your major defense partners. Is India fully in sync with the United States on Russia?
We're in consultation with India today. We haven't resolved that completely.
One more question.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Oh my, no way.
President Biden taking questions from the press corps after announcing
Taking questions? That was like five questions.
To Russian President Vladimir
It's like a
Putin
war going
and
on.
Russian troops' attack on Ukraine. The American president saying Putin has chosen a war without a cause. Now the president pledged that America and its allies.
Oh, he's like so quick. He just doesn't. Let's see what's going on. Updates. We're not fighting in Russian troops. All right, nothing new on this.
India to just how far these sanctions truly go and how much they will hurt. Let's head to Hannah Jewell now outside the White House. Our national video reporter can talk to us more about the highlights of the president's remarks. Hannah?
So, Libby, we heard Biden call this a brutal assault and, as he said, a war without a cause. And we got an outline of the new level of sanctions that the president is bringing, that the United States rather is bringing against Russia in tandem with its allies. Those include limiting exports to Russia, affecting technology sectors he was alluding to, as well as defense, limiting Russian access.
Oops.
Only at Metro by
Story of my life. You know. See what's going on. RT News.
Я, короче, пропустил, там столько танков. Ой, еще он какая-то.
We heard from people living in Ukraine's Kherson region near Crimea. One of them expressed surprise. The Ukrainian army is nowhere to be seen.
Где наши власти, скажите? Где наши воины? Вон опять валят, вот. И что нам делать?
Что нам делать, да.
Что нам делать?
Но Зеленский сказал, что вообще зашли российские войска сюда или нет?
Я не знаю, ничего нет, информации никакой.
Спасибо за комментарий.
Я так думаю, что украинской власти выгодно это.
Или Зеленского сливают просто.
Чего?
Или его сливают просто, Зеленского.
Может быть. Честно сказать, я в шоке просто от этого. Нас ночью так бомбили тут, что мы в шоке тут были. Поэтому, что мы думаем сейчас, не могу сказать.
Well, another update. The Ukrainian government is saying Russian forces have seized control of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The facility was shut down, of course, after the infamous disaster in 1986. There's been an exclusion zone surrounding it.
All right, let's check out their news.
Comes to the table with as far as sanctions are concerned against Russia. He said NATO
I can't stand when they just repeat
the
everything he
president
already
to get
said.
tougher. So you really heard him defend why he believes this strategy is working. He says it's not a deterrent, but ultimately he thinks that it will have an impact. And then finally, Lester, I would just note that he braced Americans for more pain at the pump and when it comes to inflation, with prices rising on everything from gas to groceries. Lester.
I can't believe he blames the company. The fact that he even added companies in that speech was just the silliest thing I've ever seen. Why don't we just focus on ourselves, you know? This is an obvious reason for a couple of things. Don't denuclearize people that want to have nukes if we're not going to back them. And also, maybe be more energy independent. I don't know. Is that a crazy idea?
The capital here. There's been ongoing battles with Ukrainian forces. They appear now to be in control of that. In Chernobyl, which is about 65 miles or so due north of the capital, Kiev, again, Russian forces appear in control there. Heavy fighting is taking place in Kharkiv in the northeast and also down towards Crimea in the south. Again, Russian forces seem to have overwhelmed Ukrainian defenses in one of the first key towns on Ukrainian soil. And what it looks like is an attempt to try and encircle Kiev, and the situation in the capital is looking increasingly dire.
And of course, the question, Ian, the world has right now in watching these forces encircle Kyiv, as you've just pointed out, does this in fact mean that Vladimir Putin wants a change in government there?
Yeah, I think really the attempt here seems to be to try and decapitate the government. We know that the Biden administration tried to urge President Zelensky to leave. That was something he didn't want to do. He has tried to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Ukrainian people who've really been tested today. We met one, she's a news anchor, morning news anchor, who we'd interviewed a couple of weeks ago. They were preparing for the worst. Her husband had volunteered for the civil defense. Today, he had to go off to the front line. They had to take their 3 children on their own to a hotel in the west of the country where they've been checked into that hotel, left on their own. He's gone back and gone to the front lines. She's now on her own in an apartment wondering what does she do if Russian forces come in. So real difficult choices that ordinary Ukrainians are having to make. But the reality is it looks like an attempt to decapitate the military and take out the Ukrainian government.
One last quick question before I let you go there, Ian. You mentioned it there, and it's a breaking headline while we were on the air, a confirmation of the Chernobyl zone, the so-called exclusion zone. You mentioned there that Russian forces now have control of that, and we should remind our audience, after years, obviously, of reporting on Chernobyl, that this is still a very dangerous site.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a very high-risk area. It is known as an exclusion zone, and the Ukrainian government have conceded that they've lost control of that area, but also said they can't guarantee the safety of that Chernobyl site, which is still very much active and dangerous, even though it's effectively capped. One imagines that's another bridgehead towards the capital, Kiev, but we have to wait and see. The ball is entirely in Vladimir Putin's court. There is military resistance taking place by the Ukrainians, but what we're seeing here is overwhelming power in the hands of the Kremlin and its forces on the ground.
All right, just extraordinary reporting from Ian Pannell and our team inside Ukraine. Ian, thank you. We know a state of emergency in effect in Ukraine, a curfew in effect. President Zelensky urging anyone in the country who can take up arms to do so and fight for independence, to protect their sovereign nation from attack from the Russians.
Crazy. Let's see what's going on. I like RT News right now.
Head out of the city,
I know that they're a propaganda channel,
to the west of the country.
Especially on days like this, but they're actually talking
on the roads. Some in Kiev are taking shelter on the ground in the metro systems. Authorities have been telling people to use the stations as bomb shelters, as metro trains have temporarily stopped running. We heard from locals who've been witnessing some of the panic in the capital, Kiev.
I hear it. It's somewhere in Kiev. Sirens can be heard. They are bombing.
When we landed in the airport, we heard some bangs. It was unclear what they were. We didn't see any damage. We heard the bangs while in a taxi. Nobody knew what it was.
People started leaving Kiev, packing their cars into a huge traffic jam. Everything was crowded, but most people stayed home. My friends and I hope things will be okay. We hope that Kiev will not be bombed.
There are huge queues for petrol stations on the roads, several hours long. It's impossible to refuel. It's good that I had a full tank, but I still have to refuel somewhere. We've been leaving Kiev for 4 hours already.
Well, European reaction has been pouring in since the start of the Russian operation in Ukraine. Paula Slier breaks down some of that response.
The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has said that Putin chose to bring war back to Europe. Now, this is factually incorrect. You need to remember, of course, that the war has been ongoing since 2014. So that's 8 years. And the Western media and Western diplomats are at fault for not pointing that out. In fact, in the last 4 years, so if we're looking at just simply from 2000...
That is true. People were talking about, like, this is brand new. They've been fighting for a long time. Let's see what's going on Twitter. Glenn Beck, sanctions, no SWIFT, no direct sanctions, and Putin will, let's wait a month. Yeah, I can't believe Biden said, let's wait a month. That was a little weird. I mean, in a month, so much could happen in a month. So much could happen. Yeah, and the question about China was a little weird. This question right here.
Are you? If I could follow up, sir, are you urging China to help isolate Russia? Are you urging China to help isolate Russia?
I'm not prepared to comment on that at the moment.
For obvious reasons, because they're not going to. They're completely silent. They're just watching the stage. They're probably waiting to see what's going on to see if they want to attack Taiwan or not. 7,000 U.S. troops deploying to Germany in the coming days, the Pentagon just said. If you thought this was over, this is only just now heating up. Peter Ducey, man, you could have. I wish Peter Ducey would have asked: does this mean we're going to start drilling in America? Because it's time to open the pipeline. Stop messing around with our reserves.
And they will agree and provide political guidance to adopt the stronger package, the harshest package of sanctions we have ever implemented. This is not a question of blocks.
Make sure you're subscribed if you're new, guys. We're going to be going live for a long time today. We got the press briefing in 43 minutes.
Airfields taking out the Ukrainian military aircraft. So far, defense officials don't have any assessment on casualties, civilian, Ukrainian military, or even Russian military, but they are watching that. That's something that they're trying to get a better sense of. It seems as if what we saw...
We're going to watch the press conference together, and after the press conference, I'm going to take a quick break, and then I'll be back later tonight to watch the news, catch up with you, so be sure to check out with me. If you're new here, subscribe. Like, share, subscribe, tell your friends and family about the Derek O'Shea Show. Share this on all social media networks. It helps me out. And if you want to support my show, you go to buymeacoffee.com/Derek O'Shea Show. It helps pay for all this stuff. But let me know if you have any questions or comments or want me to show anything.
Decide to go after some Ukrainian civilian population centers. And what that means is in the effort to go after...
Also, we are live on Rumble, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube.
Where Ukrainian civilians are living. There's a very real concern.
Effective, but also to take on the Ukrainian government in an effort to potentially try and encircle the capital. We've seen hundreds, potentially thousands of people leave Kiev today, heading westwards. Also, people coming from the east of the country in this direction. Things have changed dramatically in 24 hours, and the situation tonight in the capital looks increasingly desperate.
So, Ian, with those that have not been able to leave, what more can you tell us about this major curfew that has been imposed? Also, we are reading that the metro stations there are turning into bomb shelters. Can you give us more for a feel of what Ukrainians are going through there in Kyiv that have not been able to leave?
Yeah, and that is the vast majority. It's a good question. The streets have been eerily quiet today. Most of the shops, most of the stores have been closed. The supermarkets that were open had lines of people going in there, stocking up on supplies. This is something that we hadn't seen in the previous few weeks, despite all the warnings. ATM machines had long lines of people. As you say, some of the metro stations, which are very deep underground, were being used as bomb shelters. But I think this is a very terrifying and lonely time for a lot of Ukrainians. We just met up with a woman called Mariska Podolko. She's a famous morning news anchor here in Ukraine. We'd interviewed with her for ABC News a few weeks back. We'd stayed in contact with her. Her husband, who's a former MP, had signed up with the civilian defense forces. We saw him in training. He didn't even have a real gun at that point, just a wooden silhouette of a gun. Well, today, he's now gone effectively to the army. He's left his wife. Their children have been dropped off at a hotel on their own in western Ukraine for their own safety, while she tries to get her elderly parents together and decides what to do. She sat in a flat just with her cat, alone and afraid and not knowing what to do. They all believed they'd have more time. They all believed that this would never happen. Nobody could have imagined quite how devastating a moment this would be for the country and for the individuals. And that's what everyone's having to go through right now. It's hard to comprehend. You know, the Ukrainians are like us. They live their lives in a very similar way. They have similar aspirations. And they, like us, would never have imagined that such a day would come to pass. And yet that is the reality. It's a very lonely prospect. Yes, the rest of the world may condemn what's happening, but they know that this fight is theirs and theirs alone.
It is quite a tale of two countries. Ian Panel there in Kyiv for us with a feel for how the people, the Ukrainians, are responding to this invasion. From there, we go to Moscow, where our James Longman is there on the streets. He, too, has had a chance to talk to the people there. James, I understand you've been a part of witnessing protests. Tell us what the response has been, not only to the President of the United States and his speech that he gave just moments ago, but what things have been like since we talked yesterday.
Well, we heard that there were protests down on the street here in central Moscow, and we felt we had to come down and see. There were hundreds of people actually on the street. It's calmed down a bit now, but you can see this is the response you get in Vladimir Putin's Russia if you decide to come out and protest the decision he's made. Riot police, these are the men in blue here, and they have been steadily picking people off the street, arresting them. I was listening to President Biden's comments there. Whilst he was speaking, 3 or 4 people were arrested at the time. One was just stood next to me, not doing anything at all, picked off the street, taken away. That is what happens here. Now, there haven't been protests like this really since the arrest of Alexei Navalny over a year ago, and so it really is quite something to watch people come down into the street here. They are mostly young people. I had 2 young girls, actually. There's 2 students who ran up to us, literally. She said to me, "What news organisation are you from?" I said, "ABC News." She said, "ABC News, really? Let me speak to you." I've never had that before, and it was absolutely extraordinary because she felt so overwhelmed that she had the chance to say how she felt about something.
I'm sure.
And she said that Vladimir Putin does not represent her. And she felt very strongly that she wanted to make that known. But there's a sense really among young people here that they don't really have a leadership for their opposition here, because obviously in Vladimir Putin's Russia, you are arrested and imprisoned if you show that you disagree with him or if you show any opposition to him. So really it's an opposition movement which is leaderless. But they came down here, they said they were chanting no to war, and they wanted to have their feelings heard. And I spoke to another woman who was very moving. I said, "What do you want to say to the people of Ukraine?" And she looked at the camera and she just said, "We're praying for your women and children." Because there is a realization among a certain quarter of Russian society that what Vladimir Putin has done is awful as far as they're concerned. I should say that this is not the majority necessarily in Russia. There are many different Russias. We're in Moscow, a cosmopolitan city. There will be many Russians across the country who do believe in what Vladimir Putin has been saying, and that's for one very clear reason, which is that it's a very heavily controlled media space here. We had an announcement yesterday by the kind of media watchdog. It's essentially
Sorry,
a
I'm just trying to fix it.
telling media outlets here
Just
that
changing
they
up the look
must
every once in a while
quote, unquote,
for myself.
official Russian sources to report on the news from Ukraine, and if they don't, they get fined. $80,000 is the fine, because they're talking about this as being a military operation. They won't use the word invasion. You won't see that word used on any Russian state media, because they have to walk a very fine line. Ukraine is not some distant foreign nation. They are brothers and sisters to Russian people. They are, in many cases, cousins. They're relations. They share a shared history, a shared culture. And Vladimir Putin knows that. So they've been very, very clear about the narrative here. This is not about attacking civilians. They've said that. They said it's only about hitting military installations, and it certainly isn't an invasion. And now, people here in Russia will be left to kind of come to their own conclusions about that. But certainly these young people on the street here in Moscow, they don't believe a word of it. Kira?
James Longman in Moscow. James, thank you so much. Appreciate your perspective. So from Ukraine to Russia to now here in our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., where we heard President Biden.
All right, let's see what's going on.
Given the reality, though, of where we are now, given the situation on the ground in Ukraine, what do you think is the best outcome here? Is it possible for both sides to get back to the negotiating table, or sadly, are we now past that point?
I think sadly we're past that point. I think we have obviously entered a new era. I call it the Israelization of international politics, where essentially countries now will be much likelier to try to solve their problems through direct military intervention. So I think that we're going to enter into a period of growing international anarchy, of rising levels of military conflict. I think it's a very dangerous turn in international politics.
Now, there are some politicians in Ukraine who are calling on their government to negotiate directly with Russia. Can you see that happening? And what's the next move for President Zelensky? What can he do to try and save what is a pretty dire situation?
Chernobyl nuclear power plant seized by Russian forces, says it's of vital importance that safe and secure operations are not disputed in any way.
America will be frozen. But you're exact.
Let's see.
The NATO alliance comments were so critical, and the NATO summit tomorrow is so important. The president made very clear that the U.S. is willing to go to war to protect members of NATO, which includes several countries that were.
I feel despair, LOL. I'm just hoping that American people will work together against those fools.
Efforts by Sweden and Finland.
Yeah, well,
Finland stayed neutral during the Cold War.
I think Putin is more foolish at the moment for doing what he's doing.
Suggestion. There's some political debate about it internally, but Russia attacking Ukraine could push Finland more toward Europe. Finland potentially could join NATO. Same thing goes for Sweden. Obviously, Norway already a member of NATO. You know, the NATO alliance, as the president said, is the most effective military alliance in history. And frankly,
this guy
problem on its own, unilaterally, in a way which would not be favorable to the people in those the residents of those embattled enclaves. So that's what they were hoping for. And meanwhile, they were putting pressure on Russia, increasing their rhetoric, engaging in all kinds of wild charges, and now look what's happened. Russia has struck back.
Just looking.
All right, what's this?
Of this possibly targeting government areas, some civilian areas. This is supposed to be the quiet part of the country. We're certainly hoping it'll remain that way.
Cal, an advisor to President Zelensky saying that Russian forces have taken control of the Chernobyl nuclear plant. What have you heard? What do you know there?
Yeah, so fierce fighting, according to the government, at the Chernobyl nuclear plant. There is still an active plant there, so there is a purpose to the target. Whether it's a power plant, the Russians clearly want to occupy that space. The other thing that we really need to keep our eyes on is this airfield just north of Kyiv, the capital. Russian forces are now there. Paratroopers are on the ground. They have secured that airfield. We understand the fighting is ongoing, but that's going to be key as we move forward to seeing how wide this offensive really gets, Allison.
Cal, I know you've said that you hope that it remains quiet there as it has so far. What are you hearing from Ukrainians there in Lviv? It is one thing to be on the brink of an invasion, on the brink of an attack, but now that they are, what are they telling you?
Reality has set in, and it was really the morning hours where we saw this sort of surreal scene where the UN Security Council is talking, Vladimir Putin gives a speech, and then you have these explosions happening in Kyiv. And for so long, the government was downplaying the threat from Russia for the obvious reason they did not want to create panic. They did not want to create a run on the banks. Well, that's happening now. People are fleeing the capital.
Yeah, of course.
We saw long lines
you
of
got to
cars
look out for number
as
one.
Tried to leave. Some of them were able to make it to where I am.
Trust
Other
the
folks
government
were able to make it as far as the Polish border, where at last check there was about a 3-kilometer backup. But some folks just unable to make it out of the city. You had a crush of people trying to get out. Gasoline is a problem right now. You have a shortage of things going on, and you have those cyber attacks. So it's becoming more and more difficult for civilians to remove themselves from these areas. And also, we don't really know where the fighting is. We are in the very early hours of what seems like is going to be a longer campaign. And so it's just not clear where the fighting is happening. And that unknown is incredibly frightening for civilians, of course.
Cal, I have to ask, I mean, where you are people going about their daily lives? I mean, what are you seeing people doing differently? It's got to be the most eerie thing to know that a country is under attack, yet to look around you and not necessarily see immediate signs. Could you describe that for us?
It's totally surreal and bizarre, but it is very representative of a lot of war zones around the world where people have their daily lives that they need to get on with as long as they can. And nobody wants to leave the place that they live. Nobody wants to take their kids away from their homes and out of their schools and away from their lives. So people are waiting until that very last minute. It is literally the most dangerous game in life. And you have these surreal scenes where people are going about their daily lives behind me, but they're also trying to move relatives. I saw a video of a child playing a piano in a hotel lobby in Mariupol as Russian troops are advancing on that city. I mean,
What's up, Susan? Yeah, I think it's okay that you said that. I think we could all, I wouldn't say you don't like Russians. I would say you don't like Putin, because there's a lot of Russians that are protesting right now the actions of their government. I mean, and they're getting locked up. So shout out to those people.
And Biden in the last hour laying out further consequences for Russia, including more sanctions, particularly on the big banks there. Could you tell us what specifically those sanctions look like? What else he said in his talk just a short time ago?
Well, the way to look at it, Allison, is you take the banks and you take the oligarchs who were sanctioned just a few days ago with that first tranche of sanctions the president announced, and just quadruple the numbers, really. They've upped the numbers significantly. What we also heard the president do in terms of new sanctions, though, which is significant, are called export control sanctions. This is really a step designed to hammer the Russian economy as it tries to diversify beyond energy exports. And what this does is it prevents Russia from being able to access things like semiconductors, other advanced materials that are required as they try to diversify their manufacturing section. So this is all part of a White House view as maybe these sanctions don't deter President Putin from escalating any further, but he already has a very fragile economy, and this is aimed to really but he already has a...
What's up, Susan? I don't believe in hate speech, so, but I don't know what Facebook won't do anything to you. You're fine.
Biden meeting with his National Security Council in the Situation Room this morning. There it is. The president also spoke with Ukrainian President Zelensky on the phone today. What do you know about that conversation? What is President Biden's overall message to Ukraine today?
Yeah, the call from Ukraine's president came actually in the very early morning hours, and what the president used that as an opportunity to do was to express the continued solidarity of the American people with Ukraine, to say that they would continue to provide economic assistance to Ukraine at this moment, and to reiterate that the world was going to be working closely to provide exactly the kind of economic sanctions that the president has announced today. Now, of course, Ukraine, we've been hearing from their ambassador here in Washington, but also some of their leaders back in Kyiv, that there are further steps that they want to see the administration take.
Yep.
One of the steps the president didn't announce
100%.
today, for instance, is blocking Russia's access from what's called the SWIFT system. As Garrett Hake likes to describe it, that's like Venmo and Slack altogether. If you want to conduct any international business, you need access to the SWIFT banking system. And so that's one escalatory step that they want to see take. And also the targeting of oligarchs is one thing. The targeting of Putin personally is another. And as we heard the president just say in his news conference there, it's an option that's still on the table.
Like a fantastic description for people who've been hearing SWIFT for the very first time today. Also earlier today, we know the president spoke with the G7 leaders for about an hour. What's the latest on the coordinated effort from the U.S. and its allies? And I know that may be changing by the hour, by the day.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, interestingly, a meeting of the G7 leaders that had been on the books for a week. Germany is really just taking over as the current president of the G7 group. But obviously, all the focus today was on dealing with the situation in Ukraine. And what White House officials have been emphasizing is that when the U.S. takes action on sanctions on its own, they have been really matched part and parcel by our European allies, by the United Kingdom.
Let's try something. Let's see what's going on here.
Many of whom.
Nothing. Still waiting on the press briefing that happened. We got that has just got pushed back. Ugh. Gosh.
Then the situation with the
Washington Post
missile crisis.
Let's hear the propaganda news network.
In fact, this is exactly the same situation. You know, if you don't take out the missiles, we will. And that's what Putin seems to have done overnight. I'm not sure what the situation is like later, how the things are progressing. From what I've seen, the focus has been on military bases for the time being. But it's a shock, and unfortunately, I think Russia will pay will be made to pay a high price, and I think Europe will pay a huge price as well. It's everyone's shooting on their own feet here, and they could have been completely avoided, not once but several times. There were 8 years to consider, even open to the idea of changing the architecture, which is completely, it's not even useless, it's completely inappropriate, because the NATO was designed to protect Europe from Soviet Union. The Soviet Union has long finished. It's no longer in existence. So NATO should have been, the architecture should have been changed already in 1992. This is already, we are 30 years too late.
Don, when I was this morning, when I was watching events unfold and checking around various news outlets, trying to get my head around what was going on, the thought entered my head that the post-Cold War era is finally over. We're in a new epoch right now. I don't know what to call it. But the pan-European security architecture that came into existence after the end of the Soviet Union, after the end of the Cold War, now it's completely collapsed because security is indivisible. If one country is threatened, all are. And this is the situation that we have come to now. And Ukraine is paying a very heavy price for not making a choice. Let's
see what's going on around military transport planes of Russia. Okay.
We have been witnessing of how small children are dying, of how civilians are just shelled in the center of their cities. This is surreal. This is a proper world war in my mind, and this is how it should be treated.
Svetlana, final question. As a foreign policy advisor there in Ukraine, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Western leaders are limited in what kind of support they can provide you and your people. Do you feel that our country is doing enough? And what do you think it will take for President Putin to back off?
First of all, I don't think it has been done enough because, for example, Germany offered us in the preparation to this aggression. Everyone knew that Putin is going to invade. Everyone has been talking already for months, and Germany offered us 5,000 helmets. 5,000 helmets to protect ourselves from one of the strongest army in the world, right? So I think that many sanctions should have been enacted before, because that would give Putin a completely different calculation, not even from a military point of view, but from a point of view that his population, people around him, business and oligarchs, would be so angry and would probably show him that, hey, Putin, maybe we shouldn't do that because it will fire back on us as well. Now, it seems to me that it's a bit too late and too little to go with sanctions like that, because anyway, they're already in Kiev. They're in my city, they're in my home, and I think that strong answer, this is what it could have taken in order to prevent this war at all. Now, we are in the middle of this war. So I think that, for example, there was a discussion about SWIFT. I mean, what else Putin has to do in order for SWIFT to be enacted? Like, what on earth can more aggressive or more
I can't imagine living in Ukraine right now.
To a peaceful country like Ukraine or any other country in the world, so that the strongest and most painful sanctions should be enacted to stop this war. That's like an open, a rhetoric question that I'm answering, I think.
Svetlana Selachuk, I appreciate you calling in
What's
there
everyone's
from
thoughts
the
on
streets
Ukraine?
of Kyiv. Let's stay in close contact as the news continues to develop here out of Ukraine and Russia. We are joined by a number of various guests that are advising not only those there in Ukraine, as we heard from Svetlana, but here back in the States. Members like Ann Wagner, representing Missouri's 2nd Congressional District, is joining now with her take as she follows today's developments. Congresswoman, let's begin with you. You heard the president's speech. What stood out to you? What more do we need to do at this point? The president announcing additional sanctions, but clearly right now, Putin not paying any attention to them.
Well, we should have been doing much, much more, Kira, up to this point as a deterrent factor. Our hearts, first of all, and prayers and thoughts go out to the people of Ukraine. This is an unprovoked and unwarranted war, an invasion of their sovereign territory, and I put some blame on the United States and this administration for slow rolling these sanctions. They should have been crippling. They should have been all-encompassing. I don't know why we're trickling this out a little bit at a time. I'm pleased that we're going after the financial institutions in a larger level. The other day, it was just a pinprick. It was, 2 small banks. Now at least he's up to $1 trillion. But what about the SWIFT system? The UK were the first to call for it today. We should be taking them off of their ability to transfer money and work within the financial.
It's pretty dark in there, though, at the time.
Ukraine has a long history of insurgency. So even if Putin wins this first volley, the Ukrainian people are strong. They've been fighting for 8 years. They know their territory. They're motivated. And it's not going to be a cakewalk for Vladimir Putin.
President Biden announcing new economic sanctions today, basically blocking Russia's biggest banks. But Russia has not been kicked off the SWIFT banking system. President Biden saying these economic sanctions basically have a comparable effect. Do you agree, or is it time to hit Putin on SWIFT?
It's absolutely time to hit Vladimir Putin on SWIFT. This is ridiculous. I don't know what they're waiting for. The response in Kiev is, really, that's it? There's a lot of disappointment. The Ukrainians feel alone, and they feel like we don't have their back. I know we're waiting on Germany and Italy, but come on, this is what diplomacy is about. Get it done. The Biden administration needs to get on the phone and line this up now. And they also need to be thinking about how they can send additional defensive material. It's still possible to get defensive arms to Lviv, and they should be doing that right now.
All right, Melinda, thank you for being with us. Thank you for bringing us the perspective there from Warsaw, Poland. Appreciate it. All right, let's bring in NBC News military analyst Colonel Jack Jacobs. Colonel Jacobs, thank you for being with us. We are in the first 24 hours of Russia's assault. Is this how you expected it to start, and what could come next?
Well, I think a lot of people, including me, expected it to be a little slower than this. That the incursions would take place mostly, if not exclusively, in the east. But he did have a large number of armored divisions and mechanized infantry divisions in Belarus in the north to threaten Kiev. So it's not surprising that he took this route. What is really surprising is that he went all the way in as far as he did. But stopped. And he stopped because he wanted to see what the United States and the West was going to do. He's now seen that.
Iran's president
he will shrug this off and then
tells
carry
Putin
on.
NATO expands a serious threat in Russia.
We've been talking about the SWIFT
in
system,
Ukraine.
and the question was asked, why not take them off the SWIFT system right now? And there are a couple of reasons why we decided to do that. And you could argue with both of them. One is,
there's some of the anti-war protests in Moscow right now. Even right now with Moscow, they're protesting. Takes a lot of cojones to do that kind of protesting in that kind of country. So shout out to these people that are protesting the war, protesting their government. What else is going on? Still got 61 minutes to the press conference.
through our own eyes and say to ourselves, well, the American people wouldn't put up with that if we couldn't do any transactions and our economy went down the tubes. Not to be too paternalistic, but the Russian people have endured a great deal of trouble in its history, and they may, in fact, put up with this, too. Their economy is on the ropes now.
Yeah.
When the president mentioned that The VTB banks got $250 billion. Each of the 4 or 5 largest American banks has at least 1,000 times more in assets than that. So it doesn't look like economic sanctions are going to crush Putin and his cronies.
No.
What may crush
nothing.
him in the end is
They'll hurt
occupying
us.
Ukraine and having to put up with a long-term guerrilla war, Allison.
Former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Admiral Stavridis predicted that Putin will try to capture Ukraine's president. Here he is on the Today Show.
I think he's going to go full bore, get to Kyiv, try and capture Zelensky. We've got to protect Zelensky, figure out a way for him to have a government in exile, arm a Ukrainian resistance. We've got a lot of work ahead of us.
Do you agree? And how can the U.S. and our allies best help President Zelensky right now?
Well, I think Admiral Stavridis is absolutely correct, and a lot of people think exactly the same way, that a government in exile is exactly what Ukraine's going to need in these circumstances. We're not going to be able to, the Ukrainian army is not going to be able to resist. I think operating, controlling guerrilla warfare inside Ukraine after the fact might be the way to go. But in any case, any government that's trying to get back into power needs a figurehead. And it looks like Zelensky's the guy. We need to spirit him out of the country, establish a relationship outside the country.
Why? I don't do that to your people.
Let's talk about the Nord
See what
Stream
the propaganda
2.
network is
And of
talking
course,
about.
the gambit to, in my opinion, this is all about trying to neutralize Russia from Europe for the West to focus its attentions on China, which I think
Disarming
is a
Ukraine.
stupid fever dream, but I think it's in the cards here. First of all, let's go to Toronto. Let's talk about energy. Let's look at the history of Nord Stream 2. What was its origins? Oh, I remember. Germany requested Russia to build a second pipeline. It was a German idea, and the Russians built it at a very hefty sum. Okay? Of course, when you look at Western media, particularly American media, they talk about it as if it's an American pipeline. You know, I don't know why Joe Biden or Donald Trump or anyone else in any American administration feels they have ownership of something that they don't own. But that's exactly how they talk about it in media. So Europe now is experiencing a severe energy crunch, and there is a pipeline that could be full of gas, but they don't want to fill it up because somehow this benefits Russia. It actually benefits consumers and producers, but I don't want to get too technical here. Yes. Alessandro, I mean, you know, it's almost to the point of absurd the way they're talking about energy, because it's the U.S. that wants to capture the European market at a huge premium. It's a good power play for the Americans and for their control over Europe, as we will talk about later, as they look to China. Am I over the target? Go ahead.
No, Peter, I think this is exactly right. In fact, I think ultimately the reason for the lack of understanding from the West, and particularly from the United States, is Nord Stream 2. The Nord Stream 2 stood in the way of American LNG, delivered by ship, you know, very expensive and very dangerous, because the U.S. has been increasing its production of LNG. It needs a market.
Yes.
So the Nord Stream 2 was a huge obstacle. The other problem, of course, is of Europe's, actually the world's own making. This the climate change story has increased to such an extent.
All right. Guess they're done with this. I thought they would have more news on here. Okay, let's go to it.
Only solution in Europe. Germany shut down its nuclear reactors. There's perfectly many cheaper sources available, but no, in the name of this literally
Russian
ideology,
military plane crashes in Russia,
natural gas to
Defense
fuel
Ministry.
the green revolution. So they've made the natural gas much more important, and they go and shoot their own foot by interfering.
Wow, look at the airspace,
making it now impossible. I mean, perhaps in a couple of months we may have some
COVID. Look at that airspace. My camera. That is crazy. They're just circling all around that area and not, man, crazy. All right.
They want to shut Russia out of Europe. Okay, that has been the entire thinking since the end of the Cold War. Is that quote unquote Russia, the Soviet Union is defeated. Now we push it out of Europe. American hegemony maintained, and Germany was always the wild card there because.
All right, we're gonna hear this.
Would you take up arms? Would you stand out in the street?
I doesn't have another choice. I have to do that.
You would fight?
Yeah, I will be fine.
Would you take up arms? Would you stand out in the street?
I doesn't have another choice.
Crazy. Ukrainian citizens prepared to take up arms. Can't do it without a good Second Amendment right, am I right? All right, let's keep listening.
Important driver of these policies. And you've got a market in Europe, first of all, where for 35, 40 years you've had, broader and deeper austerity imposed on workers and even the middle class, or what remains of it. Energy costs soaring before this crisis took hold, and anticipating that there would be this natural gas supply through Nord Stream 2.
See what everyone else is talking about. Still got 53 minutes left
False
before the
history.
press conference.
And that's the thing to remember here. This is all false. This is a completely manufactured crisis. It's all based on false premises. He's attacked an innocent country. This is called murder. And it's all been made up. And he continues to lie. He's lied about previous negotiations. So what your previous correspondent said is correct. This is a long-term issue that we need to deal with now. We didn't put consequences on Vladimir Putin before, and it led to this crisis. We now need to create a system of deterrence because we can't ever negotiate with him again.
You wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post last month called "Invading Ukraine Backfired on Putin Once. Why is he threatening to do it again?" In it, you wrote, while his juggling act has allowed him to remain in the seat of power for more than 20 years, a war in Europe may risk all his claimed objectives. He should remember that the delivery of body bags from Afghanistan was one of the final straws for the Soviet regime. As you describe
That's what I wonder
the consequences that this
All the
could
body
have
bags
on the
that are going to be
Russian
coming back to
people.
Russia.
What consequences could this invasion have for Putin, and how is it somehow still attractive given all that?
Yeah, that's a great question and quite a surprise because Putin went into this with several very, very clear goals. Of course, the main one is to stay in power, survival. And we can talk about that if you want to. But the big goals he's put out to the world clearly for years is he wants the U.S. out of Europe. He wants NATO dead, and he wants countries on his periphery to be essentially vassal states to Russia. The problem is these activities have made anybody who in Ukraine pro-West, anti-Russia for decades and decades in the future. The United States is now moving back into Europe. NATO, which was almost dead when President Trump was in power, and if President Trump had won again, would have been dead, is now rejuvenated. Europeans and Americans now realize why it's there, to defend against this kind of raw aggression. And NATO is and Europeans and Americans are closer together than they've ever been. So these things that Putin says he wants, he's actually getting the opposite. And sadly, Russians and Ukrainians are going to ones that are going to suffer the most in his efforts to try to get things that he's not going to get.
All right, John, thank you for your insights. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon. Next, how lawmakers are addressing Russia's attack on Ukraine. That's after this break.
All right.
And also tremendous inferiority complex, precisely because it's never really accepted into being a European country.
Putin's persona as a strong, stern leader, fueled by flamboyant photo ops prior to the pandemic and the brutal crushing of his opponents. Born in St. Petersburg in 1952, Putin was the third son and the only one to survive.
He was from a modest background, and he wasn't particularly a great student, but he was interested in history. And
What the heck are we doing? Just doing a History Channel lesson on Putin right now?
The fact that these sources were insufficient. And then they went along with and shut down nuclear reactors after Germany imports nuclear energy from France because France still has the sense to keep its nuclear reactors going. China is building hundreds of new reactors. So, and of the new type, they're much smaller, much more efficient, and much cleaner. And perhaps that's the only solution if Europe wants to survive, but they don't have the time. Luckily, I think for Europeans, I was actually, one of the first things I did when at the beginning of this military operation was check the weather forecast for Europe, European capitals for the next 2 weeks, it's going to be somewhat a bit warmer and as the spring comes, because I think they had Toronto weather, -10, -15, and so on. Putin would have had an extra card to play. They may have listened.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of Germany, the sun and wind isn't what I think of when I think of Germany. I think of good cars and beer. Don, let me go to you. We're all told this is in the name of democracy. One of the problems I have, one of the things I have with this issue here is that Ukraine had a democracy in 2014, but the West overthrew a democratically elected government. So, I mean, what is this democracy thing if they overthrew a government? Go ahead.
One of the things that's really useful for people to do, if you go to Wikipedia, as bad as it is, look at the 2010 Ukrainian election. There's a map there that shows you the relative support for Yanukovych and Tymoshenko were the two final round candidates. And to verify that election, by the way, there's also a chart, if it's still up, if the CIA doesn't take it down, of like 7 or 8 exit polls.
Activity that is allowed that's not affected by sanctions. So the economic consequences to the West would be extremely severe. And they've always been very wary of doing SWIFT, though the administration says it's not ruling it out in the future if Vladimir Putin goes even further.
Hey, Nick, one of the interesting articles I read on the Bloomberg today was just kind of some reporting about maybe a little silver lining here for this whole issue here with Ukraine is the U.S. intel was spot on. And as opposed to, say, back in 2003 with the mass destruction and all those weapons of mass destruction, is there a feeling in D.C. that our intel really did get it right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to see a fair number of victory laps by the intelligence community. But, you know, what I've heard from folks, too, is that...
What a weird time to take a victory lap.
Russian oligarchs, all trying to put the economic pressure on as we see this continued invasion in Ukraine.
Ali, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell saying today it is time to turn up the heat on Russia. What does he want to see here?
Yeah, exactly. Turn up the heat on Russia in a lot of the ways that I was just talking about. They want to see them continuing to ratchet up the economic sanctions. McConnell has been critical of the way that the Biden administration has gone about this on the sanctions front. But in terms of bolstering NATO presences there, we have heard him praise the role that the administration has played there in rallying our allies on the NATO stage and making sure that there are reinforcements around Ukraine from the NATO perspective. But again, there are certain push and pull here when you think about this from a partisanship standpoint. Many Republicans praising tough sanctions, many saying that the Biden administration should have gotten there sooner, not necessarily waiting for Russia to invade, but instead making clear that there were going to be sanctions regardless. And so that's really what we're seeing here now, a lot of response and reaction, even as lawmakers have been reminding in just the last few days that they want to be a part of this should the U.S. end up committing troops, which at this point President Biden says is not going to happen.
All right, Ali Vitale on Capitol Hill, thank you. The U.S. already feeling the...
All right.
He's now the executive director of the International Spy Museum here in Washington, D.C. Chris, always great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Kira. Great to see you.
Well, you know, you and I have been talking a lot since Putin has moved into this invasion phase of things, and just getting your perspective and looking back at your career, knowing how Putin operates. You have studied him. You have worked up strategies to deal with the threat of Vladimir Putin. Take us inside as an intelligence officer for so many decades. To you, who is Putin?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of a cumulative
what a weird
effect,
question.
Right? It is based on the fact that he's an authoritarian leader. He
Heavy
also
rockets
perceives
taking place in Kyiv.
He's been humiliated by the
Kharkiv.
dissolution of the Soviet Union, and he is seeking revenge. And as your previous reporting has suggested, very well, I might add, is the fact that he's a former KGB officer. That really is his identity. He has cloaked himself in that identity. So what does that mean? We heard some of it in the previous segment. It means he's a fighter, a survivor. He's a tough guy. That's how he perceives himself. He is the man, proverbial man we've seen a slow radicalization, if you will, if I could take some liberty with that word. He is radicalized to the point where he is taking significant greater and greater risks. And that is
Ukrainians trying to get into Poland.
Right now, it's hard for me to I feel sad. Sometimes
doing so without the kind of.
Right now, it's hard for me to I feel sad. Sometimes I do have this breakdowns because it's like it's hard to process now. It's like we know that it was going to happen. We didn't know that it was going to happen, this scenario and exactly this day. And so it's hard for me to understand what is going on. It's not crisis, it's war, it's disgusting. And it feels like, so my family stays in Lviv, and I feel like I don't know when I will see them. You know, I don't know if any of them will die, or my friends will die, or anything like that. Like, if there will be a bombing of civilian buildings or not. Like, do they close the borders? Just unknown. That's what scares me the most.
That's crazy. I can't imagine running for your life like that. See, what do I want to listen to?
We do have a polarized United States, but it's not just the United States that's polarized. Other countries across the world are dissatisfied.
Whoa, look at that
with their
big
governments.
explosion.
And last, you and I have spoken about this. I'm taking, again, some liberties here.
Boom.
This is a war, unquestionably.
That's crazy.
It's an invasion of the Ukraine. But in some ways, I look at this as a reconnaissance in force. What does that mean? He is testing the United States and the West's strengths, our resolve.
This woman just throws a Molotov cocktail at cops.
He's trying to discover.
That is a terrible throw.
He's looking for opportunities. He is testing us in short.
That's crazy.
He wants to see
it's good to see
our
people
reactions.
protesting that, though.
This is not just going to happen in Western Europe, and that's a key point. It's going to happen
feel like I'm watching
in Africa. We have
something
been tested in Syria
out of a
while
movie
we're
right now.
waging a counterterrorism campaign relatively successfully. At the same time, we're operating in the same
Russian
space
aircraft
with Russians. Russia
down.
will continue to be a spoiler.
So then, sanctions clearly not working. He's not paying attention. Vladimir Putin is not paying attention to that right now. The president is saying he realizes that. He will pay attention when his country is so weak he has no other choice. Is that what's going to happen here? Is it going to take Russia becoming so weak that finally Vladimir Putin goes, okay, I don't have any money, I don't have any resources, I can't build ships, I don't have a space program, I can't get any money?
He already has ships. He already has all that stuff.
The front line stretches for hundreds of kilometers, and we haven't been able to get close to the front lines. We have been turned back because of the dangerous situation there, as we were told. Nevertheless, across Ukraine as a whole, this has been a chaotic day, complete surprise for everyone. We saw Russian units, Russian forces launch Caliber cruise missiles at various military installations. The Ministry of Defense came out and said it themselves that they launched precision strikes against Ukrainian military infrastructure, against air defense sites, as well as against airfields and air assets of the Air Force, of the Ukrainian Air Force. There was even a port that was struck, multiple arms depots, fuel depots. We saw the fires, characteristic fires raging throughout the day. Nevertheless, the Russian defense minister came out and said that any Ukrainian that wants to surrender can surrender, he will be treated with respect. He ordered Russian troops to treat any Ukrainian regular with respect. The brunt of the resistance that we're hearing about is coming from nationalist battalions. Neo-Nazi elements, for example, such as Azov battalion, which for years has used Nazi symbols on its uniform and in its brochures and the likes. The organization, for example, is...
If you surrender, they'll probably give you a gun and tell you to go shoot. I mean, seriously.
Barring an unexpected turn in the economy, I believe it will be appropriate to move the funds rate up in March and follow with further increases in the coming months. She also went on to say the implications of the unfolding situation in Ukraine for the medium-run economic outlook in the U.S. will also be a consideration in determining the appropriate pace at which to remove accommodation. Raphael Bostic over at the Atlanta Fed saying if the numbers come in close to that, I think that we can continue with our liftoff plan. We will just have to see where things go, right? So just kind of hedging it a little bit, guys.
Yeah.
So what?
I feel like it's convenient. It gives them cover. And look, I mean,
no, isn't it truth? Isn't it reality? Like if we resolve this in a week, then things change in terms of the outlook. You already see it. People are coming back into the market saying, well, wait a minute. We've talked about it. Romaine, you've brought it up in terms of military conflict.
I have.
These things tend not to last longer term.
Absolutely. And we heard from the President of the United States, it does not appear that at least the Western nations are ready for any sort of real military confrontation here. Maybe there is a ceding of Ukraine, and as horrible as that is from a humanitarian perspective, yes, the economic ramifications, at least here in the United States, probably won't be as severe. And maybe that gives the Fed the ability to continue forward apace with what we think they're going to do.
And I think what we all have been noting is the whipsawing in the market on the back of that statement coming from President Biden earlier at about 1:30 p.m. that sort of upended the views that maybe they'd take a really hard line. We're going to go to the White House now. Bloomberg Chief Washington correspondent Anne-Marie Horden joins us. And look, the markets have decided that the president didn't go as harsh as they thought he would.
Yeah, and there's two really big things probably for that, and that Russia was spared this afternoon, their evening, which is one, they're still going to be allowed to transact in the SWIFT payment system, the Gmail of transactions, millions of transactions a day. This is something that crippled Iran's economy in 2012. Second, of course, is that for the most part, as far as I'm seeing, and we're going to get a briefing with Jen Psaki, the press secretary, alongside one of the president's chief deputy national security advisors when it comes to international finance, I see that Russian oil and gas, for the most part, comes out unscathed. This is the lifeblood of the Russian economy that pays for the military. This is how President Putin has stored up his billions of dollars. This is at the heart of the matter. But again, the president made clear he's going to do everything he can to protect American consumers at the pump. So for a while, that says to me that Russian oil and gas is off the table.
Yeah, that's really certainly, I think, what American consumers are thinking about. Anne-Marie, what did you make of when President Biden was asked about China? Are you urging China to isolate Russia? He said he's not ready to comment. In the meantime, we did have a headline cross that the Chinese embassy in Ukraine preparing flights to evacuate citizens. How do we need to kind of strategize and think about China as an element here?
Well, I think last night China made clear they're not going to come out swiftly against Russia or backing Ukraine, but they were one of the only one last night at the UN Security Council meeting to not have a serious condemnation against Russia regarding what we saw.
All right, let's go to somewhere. We get a live look at Kyiv. I mean, it looks like there's smoke coming from that building. I just don't.
It has been a war zone in the last 8 years, 8 years. However, the war has never come that close to Kyiv. So I thought I would be more prepared for this. However, the whole day I have this feeling in my guts when, this actual fear. I didn't know that it is physically possible, but it is. The pressure is so high that I keep getting messages from my foreign friends who think that they can offer some help to evacuate somewhere. But I don't want to leave Kyiv. It's my country. I want to fight for it, as well as many other Ukrainians. I don't want to become another refugee where people are going to treat me as, this unwanted person who left the country. This is a very bad situation for me.
Yeah.
However, I'm really scared, as many other journalists who have been criticizing Putin so vocally, and including the Western media, that when if Russians seize our cities and towns, they're gonna launch a repression against people like me. So I'm kind of scared.
Is that affecting?
But I'm not.
Mm-hmm. Keep going.
But I'm not panicking. That's all.
Good. You seem incredibly calm for someone who is going through all that you are. How has that changed how you do your job day to day? Are you afraid to keep reporting? Are you afraid to keep communicating that you are putting a target on yourself for the Russians?
I already put a target on myself for the Russians. I had an interview with Israeli TV channel, and I told the Russians, specifically in Israel, that their president is an international terrorist. So it's already on me, this target. But I have to do my job because I don't know, you might understand that when you're a journalist, there's some kind of a desire to keep reporting, to keep providing information to the whole world, because Russia's propaganda is so powerful. They have so much money, and Ukrainians only can fight with facts, and the facts are more boring than this legends about the Nazi regime in Kiev, which seized, and also the legends that Ukrainians gonna celebrate Russians as liberators. So, yeah, it affects. I haven't had enough sleep for at least a week.
I was going to say, I can't imagine you're sleeping very much, but man, are you calm and are you brave? I just want to ask, what kind of communication are you getting from the Ukrainian government? As you're trying to do your job, is it difficult to get accurate information right now?
They have been really responsive. They are not like they used to be, when you had to wait.
This girl's on TikTok. She has really great breakdowns of what's going on.
Right now, they're very communicative. They are posting updates in Ukrainian and sometimes in very bad English, but we're trying to make it better. They're posting updates from the war front. They're calling us not to believe and not to spread Russian propaganda, because Russia's propaganda has been really strong during the days. They for example, they're reporting that Ukrainians left Mariupol, but our interior ministry says it's not true. So it has been constant fight against fake news spread by Russian propaganda. But we also don't know exactly how many casualties we have, because our armed forces, they are promising to release the numbers when heavy fighting stops. And this makes us worried, because it seems that they're not giving all the information.
Veronica, you have my undying respect and admiration for the work that you're doing. It is one thing to be a journalist in a studio in safety in New York. It is another thing to be doing what you are doing there in Ukraine. Please stay safe. Keep up the good work, and thank you so much for taking the time to share what you're going through with us.
Thank you. Good night. We have night here.
I know. Have a good night. Thank you.
Bye.
You know she's not
All right,
sleeping.
let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli. Mike, we heard from the president. He addressed the nation
the convoy going on right now,
about an hour and
too.
a half ago, issuing new, stronger sanctions against Russia. Here he is.
And today, we're also blocking 4 more major banks. That means every asset they have in America will be frozen. This includes VTB, the second largest bank in Russia, which has $250 billion in assets.
Mike, what else is the U.S. doing here?
Well, what White House officials are saying is that the already high level of sanctions that they...
All right, guys, I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to go eat lunch, but I'm going to keep the stream going. I'm going to come back for the press conference, too. But I'll be right back. Okay? I promise you I will be back. But there's Kyiv, so look out for what's to come.
the first flight of the orbital Discovery, and the shuttle has cleared the tower. Discovery's core computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
What's up there? I'm back. Hope you enjoyed some of the smooth. Hope you guys are enjoying some of the smooth jams on a day like today. It's always difficult to do, but make sure you take some time to enjoy that you're alive today. It's good to do that. NPR with Derek O'Shea. And that's all, folks. All right, let's see what's going on. I'm back. We're waiting for the press conference to come back. It's supposed to start shortly, whatever that means.
To encircle the capital Kiev as well. If you look at the targets that have been identified today, they're primarily military, designed to try and decapitate the military, its ability to conduct command and control, but also the government as well. Russian forces also just 20 miles out of the city as well. They're taking over the Antonov air base.
What is this? Sean Penn is on the ground in Ukraine filming a documentary of the Russian invasions. Is this like a fun joke to him?
And that's how Sean Penn officially died.
God, that's just insane. Okay.
Here, which means the curfew has come into place and the city is deathly quiet. I mean, you really can hear a pin drop out there. There are no cars out on the road. Many of the lights have been turned off.
Look at that right there. 10,000 automatic rifles reportedly issued to civilians of Kyiv. 10,000 automatic rifles. It's important to learn to know how to shoot people for stuff like this. You always think, it'll never happen to me. I'll never need to use it. Well, there are evil people out there in the world, and you need to be ready for them. Snake Island. Interesting.
They've been turned into bomb shelters. Give us a sense for how they are feeling when they're trying to wake up and live a normal life amid this crisis.
Yeah, I mean, nobody can imagine what it would be like to be in that situation. We all go to bed with some sense of, I don't know whether you heard that. That was the sound of another explosion out in the distance. We're hearing them every few minutes or so. We all go to bed with the expectation that tomorrow is going to look like today. You have that guarantee, if you like. That's what living in developed societies in a situation of security gives you. Well, the Ukrainians have just suddenly lost that. The curtain has fallen away. And they're trying to be stoic. They're trying to be strong. They're trying to be unified. But of course, when push comes to shove and people's backs are against the wall, you have to make some difficult decisions. So we saw thousands of people take to the roads to head west towards the Polish border. We're hearing stories of lots of people trying to flee the east towards the capital, Kiev, and again head further west. But for those people left behind, which is the vast majority, they're having to now live with this new reality of being in a state of war. And what that means is that the metro stations that you normally take to work or to go shopping is now your place of shelter. That the ATM stores saw queues outside, the ATM points saw queues outside today with people trying to get some money out, but most banks, most businesses were closed. A few supermarkets that were open again.
That's why you always got to keep cash on hand, people. You never know. You never know about the banking system. You can't trust it. You can't fully put your trust in it. That would be a blind trust.
Bustling. There's normally gridlock out on the roads. Today, nothing of it. And as I say, by now, most of the lights around here have gone out. I know you can see the cathedral behind me. Normally that's lit up. Their lights have gone out, and it is very, very quiet. And I think there is a sense that people know what's going on. That's the only sound that we're hearing is the bell tolling at the church behind me. And people are aware of where Russian forces are, and they're asking each other, do you think they're going to come to town? Nobody expected this. Nobody imagined that the worst would come to pass. And right now, they're facing it, and they know potentially within a matter of hours or days, Russian forces could well be inside their city.
Well, I think you just laid out exactly what we're watching, Ian. You know, from a distance, you hear explosions at the same time, bells from the church. I mean, what a prophetic thing to witness with you late into the night there. Mary Alice, back here in the United States, the president announcing more sanctions against...
All right, let's go around, see what's going on in the world as we wait for the press conference. There's a live downtown. Can you imagine just driving your car, going into work, stopping at stoplights while your country is being bombed? The idea of stopping at a stoplight in the middle of war, it just seems such like a silly thing to talk about, but it just seems so crazy to me. I don't know why. Maybe I'm alone in that.
I couldn't help myself after that. I started crying. I very often think about her. I've recently taken in a German Shepherd puppy, and I'm training him for combat tasks. But I've noticed that he resembles the Bava in his habits. He has the same look in his eyes, and he lies just the way she did. There is a very clear resemblance.
It's such a weird thing to watch Russian television network right now.
Goodbye.
They're like highlighting military forces. It's so weird. It's just insane. Like, there's downtown Kyiv.
It's going to do, whether it's, I don't know, pick your thing. When there's uncertainty, that's when investors kind of pull back.
Yep.
Somebody earlier, I think, talking was it Peter Cheer about this, or somebody else, you know, that's the thing. Where do investors go? They just are uncertain about kind of where to put money to work. There's opportunities out there, no doubt about it, but where do you do it?
I tell you,
gold.
It's not in the ruble. The ruble touched a record low today. It's off more than 4% today. So people just...
How is the S&P in the green? I just don't understand the world sometimes.
Polish hospitals, you could end up creating what could, at least to the
down
Poles,
is up
appear
and
to be what's called
up is
an Article
down.
5 violation, where Poland felt it's under attack and all NATO nations have to come to each other's aid. We also are concerned, as I think you pointed out, that if, as we put these sanctions in place, Russia may also unleash either ransomware attacks or cyber attacks. So I would be, I want us to extract as much pain as possible out of Putin, but a preemptive cyber attack from the United States unleashes puts us in totally uncharted areas where we're not sure where that would fully lead.
I want to play a shot from Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer talking about cyber and how prepared we are a little bit earlier. Here he is.
Here in Washington, we have strengthened our defenses and our offenses on cyber. In other words, we have very good cyber offense. That's why we were able to take out the Russian attempts to undo our elections in 2018 and 2020, and we have strengthened our defense. We just put another $1 billion available to New York and other states to strengthen cyber defense. Cyber is a very, very serious front.
It sounds like he is confident in where we stand on cyber. For our viewers who are sitting here concerned, thinking, what happens if we are attacked? How would you respond?
Well, the truth is, when it comes to cyber, no matter how good your defenses are, bad guys, if they're a tier 1 country with the technical capabilities of Russia, can probably get in and launch an attack. You can't be 100% protected. What you can have is resiliency. So if they get in, we can get them out. And one of the reasons why we're trying to get legislation passed to make sure there's mandatory cyber incident reporting, so that if we see a cyber attack, we can tell other people in the private sector. Right now, it's voluntary. That's crazy. But I don't think, as much as I want to agree with Chuck, the idea that we can prevent a Russian attack.
I love listening to people talk about technology
for new America,
and cybersecurity that that doesn't know anything about it.
First, your reaction to this multi-pronged Russian assault that we have seen unfold. Are you surprised at the targets and Putin's initial tactics here? This is your specialty.
What we're seeing is a campaign with maximalist war aims. I mean, Vladimir Putin's goal is clearly not some strategic raid
or that picture on as well.
Gains. I think they are going to attempt to encircle the capital.
Nerd alert!
I think they're going to attempt to impose regime change. And they're advancing along multiple sort of prongs or axes into Ukraine with ground forces from the north, from the east, with a substantial breakout to the south from Crimea. They're going to attempt to encircle a large body of Ukrainian forces in the eastern part of the country. So this is a fight, maybe not for all of Ukraine, but for large parts of it, and it is a full-scale invasion.
So, Michael, you actually predicted that the Kremlin is after a regime change, that anything else just wouldn't make sense militarily. Why?
Well, it's very clear that Russian policy in previous offensives that they've attempted, 2014, 2015, has failed. Those were battles that they had won, but they hadn't achieved Russian political aims. At the end of the day, this invasion is taking place because of a long-term failure of Russian policy in Ukraine, and Russia's attempt to impose its will on the country to have a say over Ukraine's strategic orientation and domestic policies. A repeat of the kind of campaign that the Russian military ran in 14 and 15 would simply be doubling or tripling down on something that Moscow has widely acknowledged has failed. That's why they're now pursuing this completely drastic and reckless course of action. And I think that
57 Ukrainians killed as a result of a Russian invasion, 169 are wounded.
Final political solution to try to install a pro-Russian government in Kiev.
Do you think the sanctions that have been put in place thus far by the president and other global leaders will have any impact on Putin's thinking?
We got CPAC going on right now too, which is like so crazy.
It's about that. And I want to start first with you, Papa John, obviously, because you were the first person to get canceled kind of before it became the thing everybody wants to happen to them, right? It's a badge of honor. But can you talk to us about that?
I don't want to
we were kind of Barbara Mandrell. We were country when country wasn't cool.
Yeah.
It came out of nowhere. We look back on it. We had the notoriety. We had the influence. The company was doing $4 billion, and Papa John's was the American dream. And we were the perfect first target. And they went there, and there was no model. We've since got a program in place. We put it on our op-ed coming up, what to do about this.
Snore.
Actions before they took place. 3 weeks ago, Russia almost going to launch a coup. We predicted, the British reinforced that. There was going to be a Russian video that was going to show, the appearance of Ukrainians killing Russians. We said that would be fake. I think that has put the Russians off balance a bit. And the intelligence community, they don't normally lean this forward and share this information, but I think it has been very effective at both throwing Russians off guard a bit, but also bringing our Europeans and others to the table. Remember, we don't just have Europeans with us now, but we've got Japan.
DeSantis talking about.
The left does not want to honor our freedoms, and we have a responsibility to fight back on all fronts. People are coming to Florida because they want freedom. Even our critics are doing it, but I can tell you there's one fella that just hates Florida, and his name is Joe Biden.
That's the one thing I hate about politics so much. It just seems so dehumanistic, where you just can't even address what the real issues are going on in the world. We're talking about silly things like Joe Biden. And he is silly. You could be talking about Canada, you could be talking about Ukraine, but I don't know. It just seems so disingenuous. Let's go.
Knowing there's going to be consequences. The most important thing we can do is keep these consequences and sanctions and hurt not only coming from the United States, but coming from the rest of the world in a united way. And I think the other thing that is terribly important is that somehow we maintain the internet service in Ukraine so the Ukrainian people can get those images of this.
Yeah, we got Elon.
And get that broadcast to the rest of the world. And hopefully.
This guy knows nothing.
On the line.
All right. RT
to wear
News.
this beret anywhere,
So weird. They're just like propping up their military right now.
I remember him coming to Siberia once to spend the winter holidays with me. He got off the train with this crimson beret on his head. People were turning to look at him because his ears were blue with cold. But he was so proud to be able to wear the beret.
Yevgeny was the life and soul of the party.
So weird. There's Kyiv right now. Markets. The press briefing is supposed to get started. Of course they're late. I'm just so sick of people being late.
It's about Putin.
It was a hard-line, long-time tact for Republican elected officials as well as voters when it came to Russia, especially when you look at pre-Donald Trump. And that is where it becomes a little bit more hazy, and yet both attempt to be true at the same time. Number one, Allison, is that you're dealing with a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservative activists here who are still anti-Vladimir Putin and push back against the suggestion that the Republican Party believes that an appeasement towards Russian aggression is okay. At the same time, the leader of their party still exists, and that is Donald Trump. He will be speaking here on Saturday night, and you referenced his remarks here in the past days, referring to Vladimir Putin as genius, as savvy. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who is going to be speaking here tomorrow, also referred to
Speaking
Putin
of
as
disingenuous,
savvy here. But that is where this becomes.
There's no Republicans out there that love Putin. That's like the stupidest narrative ever. If you believe that, I feel sorry for you. I mean, it's just that the question is, should we be engaging in wars outside of the United States? Should we be putting our finger in everything? And that is, all of a sudden, if you question us going to war across the world for a border that has nothing to do with our own border, it's all of a sudden you're a fan of Putin. It just is so dumb. I just can't take like a silly argument like that.
Everything we can to stop it.
And that's where you got to take people back to 2019, 2020, when President Zelensky and Ukraine had sought out about nearly $400 million worth of military aid from the United States. But the Trump administration held it up. And that is, of course, what led to ultimately the first impeachment of Donald Trump, when he in that phone call said that he was looking for a favor, and that was to investigate the Bidens essentially as quid pro quo for that military aid going to Ukraine, which ultimately was released. But again, this is a complicated, difficult posture for this Republican Party to make.
Vaughn, a Florida governor and sometimes Trump foe Ron DeSantis spoke this afternoon. Do I understand correctly that he did not mention Ukraine at all? What did he talk about?
In fact, he was speaking, you're right, he was speaking at the exact same time that President Biden was addressing the nation and reporters, and yet the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, who a lot of think could potentially be to the heir to this Republican Party of Donald Trump, he did not mention a single time Ukraine or Russia, its military aggression and its invasion, which was just began overnight leading up.
That's what happens when you prepare a speech and then you stick to the speech no matter what. It's just like, that has to be the only reason.
Later this evening, Senator Rubio.
It actually means he's a big fan of Putin, according to them.
So silly.
Fit much more of the mold of the old Republican Party guard, if you will, in which there has been a much more historical hardline tact toward Russia, and we expect to hear more of that sentiment from the likes of Hawley, Cruz, and Rubio over the next 24 hours, Allison.
Snore. Who cares about
yours. A couple hundred
seriously? Who cares about CPAC?
In the heart of Lublin, Poland. They chanted in support of their homeland, not terribly surprised and yet still stunned that Ukraine is under attack. These women with a message for the world. Their town was bombed today.
That was kind of scary because I woke up because of the news that my town was bombed and the whole Ukraine was under the fire. Like,
where is your
Look at this tweet. It's time for Jake Paul to fight Putin. That's our only. Oh my God. Tim Dillon. He's such a blessing.
Bring his people in and claim the territory?
Well, everyone expected that, to be honest. It was just a matter of time.
As their voices rise in defiance,
there's people in the subway of Ukraine sleeping.
This woman is from Volyn in western Ukraine, struggling through tears, speaking the language of the very country that is attacking her.
Crazy.
Наверное, главное, это чтобы все об этом знали. И
she tells us the world must see what's happening and come to help. Though this young woman is living and studying here in Lublin, she doesn't think anyone can stop Vladimir Putin. In fact, she's considering leaving Poland, as she thinks the NATO ally could be next on Putin's list. Poland?
Poland's next.
You think?
Yeah,
Poland's
he's mentioned it before. Or maybe not directly next, but he's mentioned that he wants to get Poland. I mean, Lublin is quite in danger because we're taking a lot of Ukrainian people. We've got apartments ready. We're close to the border. So no, Poland's going to get it if he gets through Ukraine.
Poland's
a
gonna
terrifying
get it.
and dark thought, but understandable on this day.
Also, just a student talking.
Their singing poignantly starts with these words: "Battle at dawn, sun and smoke. Few know how it will end. What will be in the young minds tomorrow? Some will have hope, some will fear." A lot of national pride from Ukrainians living here in Poland. Again, that just kind of grew up around us out in the square behind me, and it was really remarkable to see the genuine sorrow and sadness they're feeling because they love their homeland and can't cross the border because it's too dangerous right now, Kira.
But a lot of hope, too, right, Phil? I mean, you've now been there for a few days. I mean, you touched down and it was go the minute you did get there. Kind of give me your overall impressions. You finally had a chance to get out into the square and take part and get to meet a lot of the different types of people that are gathered. Just your overall impressions as you've been covering this since you've been there this week.
Well, Kira, today was specifically odd because it's a holiday here in Poland. It's Poland's version of Fat Tuesday. They call it Fat Thursday. And there were lines, dozens deep, of people waiting for donuts to indulge before Lent. And as we went down those lines, we talked to every single person. And as they're living their life and they're out and they're shopping and they're holding hands and they're walking with their kids, we saw a lot of children out in the square today. On their minds, one man told us, "I can't stop thinking about it all day long." So they're living their lives here in Poland, but they know what's happening at the border. They know how many Ukrainians are going to need to come here for shelter, for safety, and yet it's kind of business as usual right now in this area of Poland.
It has to be, right? I mean, you think of so many war zones that we've been
You
in,
can see the
stories that
smoke
we've covered, and you know,
and
everyday
the lights.
people are trying to live everyday lives in the midst of these various crises that they experience. And so, as you try to balance both out, I know they talk about the politics with you as well. They talk about the personal impact, but how do they feel about the United States and NATO and the response to Vladimir Putin at this point, and how it's just impacting not only their livelihood, but what their future may look like?
Well, we heard a lot of folks talking today, and they start with NATO. They don't start with the United States. They say NATO needs to act here. NATO, the United States, the EU, all these groups putting sanctions on Vladimir Putin. It's different from region to region, right? So here in Poland, these folks have been dealing with Vladimir Putin forever. And there's a history with Poland and Russia, and it goes back a long time. And the folks here, they think Vladimir Putin is capable of anything. And as we've seen, Ian was talking about, Ukrainians a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, didn't think Vladimir Putin would be trying to take all of Ukraine. And Poles here the Polish people here never thought that it would be possible that Vladimir Putin might come across the border into Poland, into a NATO allied country. But today we heard from people, well, he's that close to the border. His troops are in Lviv. That's, an hour from the border. And they're concerned
That's crazy.
that this
That's not that
might
far
be
away.
next. That's a whole other conversation.
Oh, it is. And for the President of the United States as well. He said if indeed that were to happen, if Russia were to move into any NATO countries, the U.S. will be involved in an entirely different way. Phil Lipoff there on the ground for us in Poland. Phil, thanks so much.
Here's to hoping that does
ABC
not
News
happen.
Live, continuing coverage of the Ukraine-Russia crisis will return in...
All right, let's go around and see what's...
Kiev cuts diplomatic relations with Russia and urges the West to build an anti-Putin coalition, while the US and its allies slam the Kremlin's operation as a barbaric attack and vow the harshest of sanctions.
Let's see. There's Kiev. Johnny can't come light. I know.
100 had a similar dramatic move.
How is the S&P and Dow Jones and NASDAQ up? The stock market is so ridiculous. It makes no sense.
Allison, so incredible sentiment shift.
Yeah, really something else. Let's talk about oil prices, too. I know a lot of people have been concerned about this. We saw Brent crude, WTI, both above $100 today. Could you just explain to people what that's all about? Because I think they hear these things and then they hear that these are April futures and they're thinking, okay, why do I care? Like, how does this affect me? Why is oil over $100 a problem for the average person?
Yeah, well, oil over $100 usually translates to higher prices at the pump. Usually, it takes
Yeah,
2
wow.
weeks for higher crude oil prices
It takes a
to make
genius
its
to figure
way
that out.
to our gas pump. But because this situation is so intense and the timelines are compressed, we're already feeling higher gas prices day by day. So that's why you need to care. But it's not just gasoline. It's home heating oil. It's liquefied natural gas. It's basically everything you need to transport commodities, and that is oil. So when you see oil spike, even though we don't buy oil directly from Russia, it's 10% of global production. If that goes offline, it eventually makes its way through the system to the prices that we end up paying for all the fuel components that we need to live our daily lives. And don't forget, they call Russia and Ukraine the breadbasket of the world. A lot of wheat, a lot of grain and corn coming out of that area. Again, we don't
It's
buy
all
it
happening,
directly,
dude. It
but when you
really
take
is
that
all happening.
offline, it
Honestly.
affects prices down the line, and we're already suffering from high inflation. This
I mean,
is
the
just
media
adding
is
to the
like, corporate media is getting all pumped up right now. They're like so jacked up about the idea of Russia going to Poland, because then that means all that war. It's an economic collapse.
About today, that maybe some people who are
you would think
watching
so.
haven't heard
I don't
of
understand
before,
why
and that's the
I
SWIFT payment
knew the market would
system.
open up
A
negative,
lot of
but
talk that it's
how
time
did
to
it turn
kick
green?
Russia
Makes
off
no
of it.
freaking sense.
Can you just kind of, as simply as you can, explain to our viewers what it is and why it's such a hot topic of conversation today?
Yeah, it's an electronic transmission of payment system.
Unless in the after hours, it's just going to explode.
Talking about climate change there. Also, our ABC chief medical
Oh,
correspondent.
good. Yeah,
Dr.
now is the
Ashton,
time to
she
talk
is
about
reporting
climate
from
change.
Los Angeles this week, and as always, keeping an eye on what we need to know when it comes to our health. We will speak to both of them shortly. But yes, first, we have to get to our team coverage on the fast-moving developments in Ukraine. ABC chief global affairs correspondent Martha Raddatz is in Western Ukraine for us. Our ABC foreign correspondent James Longman is in Moscow. Martha, let me start with you, and please kind of set the scene. A use of military force in Europe like nothing we've seen since the last World War.
You've got it, TJ. That's exactly what we're seeing. And last night...
And she remembers.
With those airstrikes, with those missile strikes, with the explosions
stupid.
going on around the capital, the Russians have entered this country from 3 sides thus far, from the north in Belarus and from Russia, from the east, of course, and from the south. We are in the west right now. There were also some airstrikes about 50 or 60 miles from us.
These people are killing me being late.
But we are 50 miles from the border, and that is a real concern right now. You've already got people heading for that border. Roads, a U.S. official tells me, are already clogged going into these areas. We were there just a few days ago. It was hard enough on a normal day. It's a 2-lane highway on some of those roads to the border, but that is going to be a real problem. There's a humanitarian crisis in the making here. And another thing I want to stress really, TJ, is this last night was just the beginning. This is a campaign by the Russians. I am told by a U.S. official that they believe that they will slowly surround Kyiv, the capital city here, and try to
I'm just so anti-war that I just,
put in their own
I don't care
meanwhile,
if he thinks it's a good idea or not.
They've got
I
fighter
don't.
jets at the ready. I'm told
Way
those
too
are
many
on hold in case Ukrainian troops
people that can be affected by this. It's just freaking sad, disastrous, and terrible, and
we're seeing no doubt a crisis and the consequences on the ground. But you talked about the humanitarian crisis that could come. How well equipped are neighbors? How well equipped?
I can understand like all his talks about NATO, but Ukraine was never going to join NATO. Let's just be real. That was never ever going to happen.
Well, they say they're ready, but
delicious
the
propaganda,
areas around here have already.
You want to see delicious propaganda? I've been watching RT News,
Russian troops out of
and
the
they
airport,
just like in between like reporting on Ukraine. RT News has just been like highlighting their troops in like little fun segments because we're just having fun.
Could perhaps be headed there again.
Yay!
Putin is also calling for Ukrainian soldiers to be treated with respect. He obtained this exclusive video from a Russian war reporter in the Donbass. He claims it shows Ukrainian troops surrendering to Donetsk Republic forces. The reporter says there are soldiers who've voluntarily laid down their weapons. Authorities in Donetsk have shared pictures of one of those soldiers who's apparently wounded and receiving first aid. This video, which we cannot yet verify, reportedly shows cruise missiles flying over Vinnytsia in the west of Ukraine. Russia's defense ministry says rockets fired in this special military operation are targeting military...
Video that can't be verified. I feel like this is the whole
We
war.
also cannot yet verify, shows a missile hitting a military warehouse in the strategic Ukrainian port city of Odessa. Russian tanks have apparently also been spotted in Ukraine's Sumy region near the Russian border. A resident sent us this unverified video of military vehicles.
Exactly, America's guard.
За Донбасс. Ой, там махина. Я, короче, пропустил, ну там столько танков. Ой, еще он какая-то.
RT hasn't been too bad. There's definitely some obvious propaganda, but it's so obvious it's like unbearable. But
a little more than 1-year-old son. She's also pregnant now, and she was also there with her mother. Here's what she had to say. Were you surprised when you started hearing the bombs landing this morning?
Surprised, not really, because we knew it can happen. But yeah, I was just shocked that, you know, this century, and like I'm hearing the bombs close to my house, and like my windows are shaking. Yeah, quite surprised, but not shocked.
Okay. Are you going to spend the night down here in the subway?
Yeah, I have a child, 1.7 years old, and a sister, 3.5 years old, and we don't just feel safe, you know.
Breaking news, CDC to update mask guidance as soon as tomorrow.
So for now we're here.
Perfect timing.
And so, as you can see, you know, this young woman, Veronica, she doesn't know where she's going to go. And that's the situation for a lot of us, including myself and my team. The situation around the city is so murky. We're only looking at this conflict, I got to tell you, Allison, through a peephole.
Oh, Matt, it does seem quiet right now, but I know
it is way better than CNN.
It's going to stay that way. What are your concerns about
not drastically better than MSNBC.
How are you going to handle that?
they're the worst.
It's not that quiet.
I literally can't think of a worse news network than MSNBC. Yeah, exactly. Wear your mask as you're getting bombed. Honestly, that's been like the first thought in my mind is watching all this Ukraine stuff. It's like, where's everyone's masks?
As we understand, they had to suddenly flee due to incoming shells. Russia's defense ministry says Ukrainian forces are firing at cities in the Donbass, though Ukraine says Russia's carried out more than 200 attacks since the start of the day in the region.
TikTokers.
Well, a series of powerful explosions were reported across Ukraine this morning. Loud blasts rocked several cities after Russia launched the military operation. It's being reported the explosions were caused by missile strikes from Russia's aerospace forces. We've just received these images from Mariupol.
Okay, what time are they going live?
Across the sky, you can see damaged Ukrainian radar system.
They're not even in the room.
Explosions have been reported throughout Ukraine. We're looking at the wider picture here. You can see a map of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. Some
of you guys are just joining me. I am live right now on Rumble, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook. I think that's it. After the press conference, I'm going to go offline, but I'll be back later tonight and watching whatever is going to unfold tonight. So come join with me on YouTube and hang out. And we're going to watch videos and freak out together.
States as defined
just so you know you're not alone.
Map. Well, the Russian president announced that decision in a nationally televised speech, and he also said there's no intention to occupy Ukraine.
With accordance to the Article 51 in the 7th chapter of the UN Charter with the sanction of the Federation.
I am not going to
occupy Ukraine. I just attack it.
Position to provide a strong defense for our NATO allies. Residents in Kyiv,
Yeah, I know. It's freaking 4:11 on the East Coast. Like, I just don't.
And denazification of Ukraine will bring to the court those who committed multiple sanguinary crimes.
Thousands of meters from the Red Square at the Kremlin incites significant protests in Moscow, I assume. I love all these people that are protesting in Moscow. Freaking awesome. I mean, it's just... this Hezbollah... This guy... Hezbollah is everywhere. That's not the voice of Biden. I know. All right. Bloomberg, they're like the worst. They're just like so pumped about the market. Like, okay.
Germany is now put on hold forever, the certification of Nord Stream 2. Germany is still getting an awful lot of natural gas from Russia. So, you know, given the problems that Germany has
The
with
baby draft.
its coal and with its, you know, having ended its nuclear power plants, where else is Germany going to get its energy from other than natural gas and natural gas from Russia? Now, maybe down the road, you know,
Biden talking about like yelling at the oil companies to not mark up the prices, gouge prices. It's just so silly.
build pipes and the rest in order to have a consistent supply of energy. And that's not going to be something done in the next few weeks.
I think anybody watching the news over the last 24 hours is going to be quite shocked, and nobody wants to see war on either side. But perhaps fewer people will know the war.
No one wants to see war on either side. I love RT News. I think they already started doing warlike things. Yeah.
By Western leaders, at most ignored by Western leaders. Why do you think it's taken
insane.
8 years for things to get to the way they are?
Well, I think the Russians have been very, very patient. So despite the fact that
Yeah, they wanted to make sure Biden was in
Foreign
office.
Minister Lavrov have over and over again said, look, we have the Minsk Accords. If you want the Donetsk and Lugansk to be reincorporated within Ukraine, you have to go through this step-by-step process that was negotiated by Kiev and the representatives of the Donetsk and Lugansk. It's there, it's in black and white. It's in the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2202 as an addendum. And it's supposed to be, the steps that you have to take are spelled out very clearly. There's supposed to be an amnesty for everybody who took part in the war. There's supposed to be a constitutional change, giving special status for Donetsk and Lugansk. There's supposed to be local elections in the Donetsk and Lugansk. And then, and only then, does Ukraine get to take control of its eastern border. Ukraine has made no attempt at negotiating this seriously. And in fact, they've now openly said in recent days, particularly at the UN Security Council meeting last week, that they're not going to negotiate with the representatives of the Donetsk and Lugansk because they don't want to give them legitimacy. Well, negotiation with them was specified in that Minsk agreement. So they're openly saying, we're not going to ever negotiate. And what's really shocking is that France and Germany, which are the guarantors of the Minsk Accords along with Russia, they've been talking to Putin for months now. They go endless phone calls, visits to the Kremlin, and they've known that the Russians are now being very serious, and they said, you know, our patience has run out.
That's exactly right.
Oh,
do I think I hear press? No. I was like, what is that noise I hear? Where is this press briefing? I'm going to have to leave before the press briefing starts. This is just so...
You're taking Minsk seriously. But they weren't even prepared to do that. They allowed Ukraine openly to say, we're not going to do anything serious about Minsk.
And given the gravity of the situation on the ground right now, what do you see as the best realistic outcome for Ukraine and indeed for Russia as well, in terms of sitting down and trying to perhaps reduce the hostilities, come back to some sort of ceasefire, negotiated solution? Is there any chance now of that happening?
Well, there is a chance, because I think that contrary to all the Western media hysteria about how the Ukrainians will fight to the bitter end against the Russians, I don't think Ukrainians want this fight. I think Ukrainians want peace and reconciliation with Russia. I think they're kind of brother nations, and I think that. And that's shown by the fact that Zelensky in 2019 won a huge margin with a program of reconciliation with Russia and peace in the Donbass. So I don't think that they want this war. And I think something along the lines of an agreement between Russia and Ukraine that Ukraine will enjoy the status of a neutral power. It won't join NATO and it won't join the Collective Security Treaty Organization. That would work. And there's also the possibility, look, Russia did not recognize, or rather Russia did not incorporate the Donetsk and Lugansk into the Russian Federation. In other words, they're still there. They're political entities.
I'll probably get banned for her putting this. Hey, see you later, America's Card. I'm coming back.
Combine is war, but we're looking at a giant war in February right now. Currently, that's the projections with the top people on the earth who claim they're not with the New World Order Combine. Is war in February. And this is the type of time, like right before World War I, right before World War II, when everything kicks off.
Okay, so Alex Jones called this. Put that in the jar. Frickin' A. I'm so sick of him being right about things. God dang it. It's just unbelievable. I just can't.
There was an attack on Iran's nuclear program many years ago. This would be different, and they're talking about targeting Russian infrastructure. They're trying to do it, plan to do it, potentially, in a nuanced way so as not to destroy things, but disrupt things, so it wouldn't be considered an act of war. And by the way, no decisions have been made. It's very possible Biden opts to do none of this, but there's a lot of planning going on, and that's what we're getting wind of within U.S. Cyber Command and the NSA and the CIA, bringing options to the president as a way of retaliating against Russia and trying to help the Ukrainians.
Okay. This is
the international community had noticed for...
All right, guys. I'm going to leave. I got somewhere I need to be. I thought this press conference was supposed to start an hour ago, 2 hours ago. It's just so ridiculous. I'm going to be back later tonight. I'm going to be live, so come hang out with me, join me as we watch more of this unfold. I will be back later, probably around 8 p.m. Eastern, somewhere around there. Come hang out with me. Have a good time as we pray for Ukraine and the end of whatever is going to happen, because this is just insane. But I love you guys. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. I'm sorry about the press briefing. I just don't understand. I just feel like at this point they won't start for another hour. It's just so silly. All right, guys, and we'll watch some highlights and stuff from that too. So be sure to like, share, subscribe, tell your friends about the Derek O'Shea Show, and have a great day. But I'll see you back later today. I love you. Bye.